odds are your life is a mess. Given how many people are being absolutely destroyed by the modern world, it's just a safe bet. Social media has slammed into our outdated meat suits, and the results have been horrifying. People feel lost, we've got a mental health crisis, plummeting birth rates, global conflict, and a panoply of other joys, including your subreddit for something called gooning. Don't look that up, trust me. Thankfully, though, there is a way out, but this one ain't gonna be easy. Here to talk about it is Dr. Alok Kanojia. So many people come to you, come to me, and they know what they want. They know their dream, but they don't get out of bed. They play video games all day. They go in the goon cave and edge until their dick is about to fall off. Like they're doing things that don't move them towards their goal, and they are desperate for you to answer that question. How do you get yourself to do something you don't want to do?
You stop doing things that you want to do. So here's my problem with that. Okay. So I sort of disagree with almost the premise of the question, and I'm not going to go back to the philosophy, but let's understand this. Someone says, I want to study, right? This is my experience. So I wanted to not fail out of Spanish class. And so if you kind of look at it, right, you ask me, what's my goal? My goal is to not fail out of college. And then you say, how do I get myself to do the thing that I want? But if you really look at it, the only problem is that I want something else more. This is very important to understand. Anyone who is not moving towards their goal, the reason they don't move towards their goal is not because they lack motivation. It's because they're motivated more strongly in a different direction. Beginning and end of it. So when I work with someone who's struggling with addiction, so I had a patient, right, so who's addicted to opioids, and I was really stunned because this patient was doing so well in life. So I had a really good job, really nice family, kids who loved them, and the opioid addiction was tearing their life apart. They're going through divorce. They're going through some work assistance program. We're on the verge of getting fired. Their kids hate them. And I was like, bro, you're ruining your life, right? Like, I don't understand, like, how you don't see that you are ruining your life. And like, all you have to do is stop ruining it. Right? Stop using this early on. And that's when they explained it to me. They're like, you know, the reason I'm addicted to opiates is because it's the one thing in my life that makes all of my other problems go away. When I'm high, I'm not ruining their life. So here I am trying to get them to stop ruining their life. And the whole problem is the opiates achieve that goal. So this is where everyone needs to understand this. So my antidote to that problem is stop doing things that you're motivated towards. Conquer motivation as a phenomenon. This is the problem. Everyone's trying to motivate themselves to go towards this particular intellectual goal that is born of the mind. But there is a different part of their brain, their nucleus accumbens, is motivated towards moving towards a different goal. So my goal, my approach, right, and this is where some of the philosophy, we're not going to get into it, but this is why I think it's useful, is just sort of to think a little about transcend motivation entirely. Start to live a life where you're not motivated to do anything. Once you remove all motivation from life, then you will be completely free. Because what is motivation? Is a natural inclination to move in a particular direction. So here we are trying to struggle with creating the right motivation. So what we're really doing in that moment, I know this sounds kind of weird. See, everyone's like, how do I get motivated? How do I get motivated? Why do you want to be motivated? Because if you are motivated, it will be easy, right? That's why we all want to be motivated, because then there's a natural drive to do something. If there is a natural drive, then you get to be lazy because you don't have to control yourself. Oh, I'm so motivated to become a millionaire. And everyone's looking at this person. They're like, oh my God, this person, I wish I had that motivation. They have the drive to become a millionaire or billionaire or whatever. And so everyone's trying to create motivation. But if you really stop and think about it, you're trying to board a train that you still don't drive. You want to board a train that takes you in this direction instead of that direction. But at the end of the day, you're not driving in either one. So my solution to that is you don't motivate yourself towards a goal. You conquer all motivation. And then you're free because you're completely unmotivated. When you are completely unmotivated, then you can do whatever you want. When you're on vacation, you're not motivated to do this and you're not motivated to do that, but you can still do a lot. You don't just sit in your room all day. You're free to do whatever you feel like. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. This sounds like the moment where you tell people that you spent 7 years pursuing becoming a monk. Otherwise, they're going to be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where, like, in my case, it was like I literally basically failed out of college. So I was on academic probation and had finished 2 years of college and had like a 1.8 GPA or something like that. And so then I went to India and because I struggled with this motivation problem where like I wanted to want different things more than what I actually wanted. So I wanted to get an A. I wanted to even go to Harvard, right? So I was a pre-med and I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to be the best doctor, right? I'm going to be smart and I'm Indian and that's what we do as Indians in the United States. And so I had all these ideas about what I wanted. I had all these goals, and these were very noble goals, Tom. I was going to save the world, and I was going to cure people of cancer and do all these wonderful things, right? I was going to be a good human being and make a positive impact in the world. And then even though I wanted all those things, I was still a victim to my motivation. And since I was a victim to my motivation, I ended up playing lots of video games. I didn't know how I worked. I didn't know how to control myself. And then I went to India and I fell in love with it. At the end, my first 3 months there, I spent one summer there. And I went to my teachers and I said, I want to take sannyas. I want to become a monk. Sannyas means forsake your life. And my teachers, as based as they are, one of them said, you can't give up your life. And I said, why not? And he says, you don't have shit worth giving up. He said, go back to the US, get a doctoral degree, rise as high as you can in the material world, accomplish as much as you can at the age of 30. And if you have done a good job by then you can give it all up, but you have nothing worth giving up. Brilliant, brilliant person, right? This is what a guru is. They understand you on levels that, you don't really understand yourself. And so I kind of did that. And then that was really my drive. It was not ego and I wanted to be great. It's that my teacher told me to do something. So I'm going to follow them as a disciple, not because I want something or I have a goal I did have a goal, which is try to succeed in the material world as much as I could. But even then it wasn't like a particular target. It's like, let's see how far I can go. I'm just going to focus on this particular task. So I would kind of say focus on a task as opposed to achieve a goal, which I think we're probably will agree with anyway. That sort of leads us.
I don't quite know what you mean by that. So maybe before we can get to that, can you help me understand how you broke free of all motivation?
By understanding the nature of motivation, right? So by understanding that, like, if you look at yourself and you observe yourself, you'll realize that you have impulses. And then it's very, very simple. Do you want to give in to the impulse or not give in to the impulse? That's really what it boils down to. And so what we try to do is cultivate positive impulses, right? So but it's not about impulse, it's about kind of action. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but so it's literally what I did is observe things. And then I, for example, like gave up ice cream for 10 years because it was my favorite thing. And so I said to myself, okay, let's just give this thing up and just see how that goes. Let's see if I can give this thing up. And why did I pick ice cream? Because I enjoyed it the most. So I picked the thing that I enjoyed the most. And you can say that that's motivation, right? Maybe my nucleus accumbens wanted that. I don't know. But basically to practice with restraining your impulses. And this is where, for example, there's a practice called pratyahara.
I'm so sorry. And please don't lose your place on that. And I don't know that word, so it'd be hard for me to repeat.
Yeah.
But I'm trying, like, it is profound because I know the details of the story of, like, you try everything, you're failing out, your parents try everything, tough love, going soft on you, everything, nothing works. And suddenly something happens in India that makes you suddenly give up ice cream for 10 years. Like there's a moment in there that maybe it's too messy to mythologize and explain how it happens, but like, how do you go from I can't not play video games to I give up my favorite thing for 10 years?
Great question. So I think it's just, where is my focus? So it used to be that my focus was outside of myself. I want to accomplish this out there. I want to do this over there. I want to do this over there. And then my focus changed. My focus became internal. What's going on in here? Where does desire come from? So I had a teacher, for example, who told me that this is how they kind of conquered desire. They had a teacher, and the problem is my teacher was addicted to potato chips. And so because in the yogic path, right, then the monk path, it's about asceticism. So like not indulging in the things that you like, right? This is how we're going to become chads of meditation. So like no sex and no drugs and no fried foods, and we're going to be ascetics, which is stupid, by the way.
It sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's awful. So And so what his teacher told him is his problem was potato chips, and he'd given up everything else, but like he'd go for months without potato chips, and this is in India. So they make them fresh. You can't get them I mean, now you can get them in a store, but back in the day, you'd have a dude with a bowl of oil, like frying potato chips, fresh, delicious. They don't taste good in even 5 or 10 minutes. But so he'd walk by, and this poor yogi monk, right? He's like gone for 6 months, and he's walking down the street, and some guy's frying potato chips, and he can't help himself, and he just cracks it. And he buys the potato chips. So his teacher tells him, you do this. If you want to conquer all desire, don't try to conquer it, just observe it. Just observe it. That's all you need to do. This is the biggest thing that we misunderstand in the West. We're all about doing, achieving. We think that there is a difference between observation and action. But even if you look at the brain, the part of brain that controls an impulse is the same part of brain that observes internal conflict. I forget if it's the anterior cingulate cortex or the posterior cingulate cortex. There are studies on neuroscience that as long as you are aware of the conflict within you, you haven't lost the battle. And if your listeners pay attention, you'll know that the moment that you stop paying attention to the battle is when you've lost. But as long as you're struggling, you haven't lost. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And you can't struggle without observing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's literally the same part of the brain. It's not willpower, it's awareness of a conflict that we subjectively experience as willpower, which is kind of hard to understand. But so basically the teachers tell him, you just observe. So he bought potato chips and he kept them with him all the time. And he started to ask himself questions like, where does the desire come from? When I eat a potato chip, how much satisfaction does it bring? For how long am I satisfied? So you do this kind of process. So I just look at myself and understand, where does my desire come from? And as you pay attention to yourself, you'll discover something very interesting, which is that it's fucking dumb. So my desire for a hamburger, how much joy does it get? Or a cookie, let's say. Let's say a cookie. I really want a cookie. So in my desire, I haven't eaten the cookie, even if I restrain myself, and I'm going to be healthy, right? Because it's all carbs and, I mean, it's bad shit, right? So like, even if I eat it and I satisfy my desire, there's guilt, there's suffering. If I don't eat it, there's suffering. If I eat one, am I satisfied? No, because if I want to eat one, then I want to eat a second one. So even if I satisfy the desire for one, I still want a second one. So even there's suffering. If I eat the second one, there's even suffering after that, because now I still want a third. And then I eat a third, and there's even suffering after that, because after the third one, now I've eaten too many cookies. And now I feel guilty. So no matter where I looked at my desires, I explored myself, and I found that anytime I chase this thing, it's fucking dumb. And I can chase it today, I can chase it tomorrow. I literally did. I chased it for years and years and years. You play a video game, you watch pornography, and what happens the next day? You just want to play again. And then after you play, you feel guilty, you fail out of college, you watch pornography, your dick hurts because you're jerking off too much. Now you can't manage your emotions, you're running away from your problems in life. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's all fucking dumb. There's no way to win this game. So it is through observation that is the fundamental thing that I discovered. No amount of chasing my desires will ever lead to any sense of happiness or contentment. Or all I'm doing, I can temporarily make the problem go away, but I'm no different from an opioid addict. And that the nucleus accumbens can get a spurt of dopamine today, but that doesn't last forever. You can have the perfect wedding. How long does the joy from a perfect wedding last? How long does the resentment from not having the perfect wedding last? I've seen that last for 40 years and ruin marriages.
That's crazy.
Right? So it's just understanding the nature of desire. This is what I learned in India. Understand how you as a human being work. We have these mathematical equations, and Tom, you're brilliant, you're knowledgeable, you understand all this stuff about neuroscience and cell biology, and you have so much knowledge. But how much time do we have learning about ourselves, where your desire comes from? I'm not talking about nucleus accumbens or any of that kind of stuff, because you don't need to know that, right? The subjective experience is the realm that human beings play in. And there is value to things like gut microbiome. If I have a low serotonergic bacteria in my brain, in my gut, it won't produce tryptophan, which is a serotonin precursor, which in turn means that my serotonin level can be low, which can predispose me to more mood and anxiety, so I need to eat probiotics. All that stuff is there. I use it with my patients. But at the end of the day, all of those things will make things a little bit easier or a little bit harder. They will never fix the problem of the fundamental struggle that each human being has. I've never seen a pill or a probiotic or a surgery that can fundamentally conquer your struggle with yourself. That you have to do subjectively and internally. It's the only way.
That was a really useful explanation of coming to understand where your desire comes from and seeing it from all the angles and realizing this never goes anywhere that I want it to. I like that a lot. Okay, so as people begin to understand themselves, understand the nature of the mind, understand the nature of desire, understand the nature of suffering, my hope is that they begin to understand, okay, I'm not on a train, which I thought was a brilliant analogy. I'm not on a train that I don't steer. I am going somewhere that I'm in control of. I'm putting out the energy. I'm choosing the direction, all of that. Okay, so I'm going to call those levers that you're going to pull. You're going to choose where you go. So bringing this back to, we've got modern guys in crisis, and they now understand, okay, to do the things I want to do, I need to be aware of everything you just walked us through. So now I'm going to be able to pull the right levers. What are the right levers that they need to pull? And let's focus on dating for a second. So if these guys want to be successful with women, what are the levers that they pull in the reality of today's dating market?
So I'm going to answer that question in an annoying way and in a useful way. Okay. So the first annoying way is that you're falling into the same trap, which is, which levers do I pull to get to where I want to go? Same problem. You still have the want, which is driving you. Now you just want to achieve the want. You want to use everything that I've taught you, which is to abandon all want to begin with. We'll get to the practical in a second. But do you see that? You're still sort of like, you can do it very practically, and we're going to get to that second answer. But the real answer is to stop wanting to achieve something, right? Start really, and this is what you'll hear from people, which is focus on yourself. And so this is kind of my experience. So I struggled a lot with dating. Like in high school, I never really had a girlfriend, never really even dated at all. I had crushes on people, but didn't know how to talk to girls. Then I go to college and I was going to reinvent myself. I joined a fraternity, drank a lot, went to parties, and just had catastrophic after catastrophic. I can't even call them relationships, to be honest. And then I decided to become celibate, right? Because I'm going to become a monk. No temptation, I have to conquer sin and lust and all of these things. I'm going to rise above. So really what had happened at that point psychologically is I had failed at life, and I was adopting a narcissistic view that I'm going to rise above materialism, right? So I'm going to start devaluing that which I had failed, which is a big thing that a lot of people struggle with, is they start to devalue things that they think that they're bad at, because that's how your ego feels good about it. Then I noticed something weird happened. When I stopped worrying about sex, that's when I met my wife. And suddenly, because now, like, what used to happen is this, my subjective experience is when I'm talking to a girl, how do I get this girl to like me? You know, I have that insecurity. We human beings are empathic. So the girls would detect that insecurity in me because I'm feeling it, right? So people will say, like, be confident. Well, you can't be confident. It's not something that you can be. It's something that you are not, or are not. So how do you cultivate that confidence? With detachment. So I let go of even wanting a girlfriend. I'm going to be celibate. And suddenly women are attracted to me because now I can be confident, because I'm not trying to achieve anything. So I can be authentic. You know, I remember like talking to girls and sort of being like, hey, do you want to hang out sometime? And they'd be like, I have a boyfriend. And then I'd be like, cool. Do you want to invite him? Right. And so we'll get to the practicalities of it. But I think really letting go of the want. And this is where in the yogic system, there's this idea called vairagya, which means detachment. So this is also in Stoicism. So this whole idea that we want to detach from the outcomes of our actions, and we want to focus on the actions themselves, because I don't know if this makes sense. I can never get a girlfriend. It's literally impossible. Does that make sense to you?
Not yet.
Okay. So what can you do to get a girlfriend?
You can, to shorthand it, you can be the thing that she is very attracted to.
And if you are the thing that she is very attracted to, does that mean that she's going to be your girlfriend?
Yes. Yes.
I would disagree, right? So I know lots of people who are attracted to all kinds of people, but choose not to date them for any number of reasons.
Sure. Be the thing the girl wants, maybe would have been a better way to say it.
So here's the reason you can never get a girlfriend, because there is another conscious being at play.
Mm-hmm.
So you can never control what she does.
That's one way to look at it.
I think can you control another human being?
Yes. I know what you're getting at. So instead of giving cheeky answers, I will just say this. literally every word you're saying, I think, is so bang on accurate, but I think it is misleading to not acknowledge that you can do things to sway somebody's opinion about you for better or worse, that you can have very profound influence. So I will use this bit of my own life experience. Like you in high school, I was just unbelievably bad with women. I was once in bed with a woman. I was on second base, rounding third, and I managed to fuck it up. I still can't believe this is a real story. This is a real story. And I just did not understand how to be successful with women. And then when I figured it out, the punchline being what I would have said, no fear of loss, what you're calling detachment or no desire. Once I had no fear of loss and I presented myself very confidently, and was I faking it? I wasn't really faking it. I was like, I just no longer care what they think about me. I'm going to be me, because I had come to believe it was the winning strategy. So my confidence was in the strategy itself. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with you at all, but I still think, oh, I guess I do. But
well, let me finish that story. Once I did that, then my hit rate went from 1% to 40%. I mean, nobody bats 1,000, but it was such a leap forward that I can't force anybody to do anything, but man, when you are a key that unlocks a certain number of doors, and it's a good number of doors, all of a sudden you feel like, oh my God, the key, I just needed the key. Your home is where you should feel the safest. Stay protected, connected, and in control 24/7 with the #1 customer-rated DIY home security system from Cove. Cove was named Best Home Security System in 2023 by US News and World Report and is less than half the cost of most traditional home security systems. The average install takes less than 30 minutes, so you're up and running quickly and easily. Cove's intuitive alarm panel keeps you connected to their 6 monitoring stations at all times, so you'll get the help you need right away. And with their rapid SOS alarm response system, Cove will confirm your emergency and send help in as little as 30 seconds. Save 70% and get a free HD camera when you sign up at covesmart.com/impact. That's covesmart.com/impact to save 70% and get a free HD camera.
So I'm with you. And I say this as a doctor, right? So let me kind of agree and disagree with you. So as a doctor, do I have the power to save a life?
Yes.
I would say no.
Yes,
right. So you learn this the hard way in medicine. So I trained at Harvard Medical School. I had great teachers. We have amazing equipment, and no doctor has the power over life and death. Right. So you're allowed to disagree with that. Now, that doesn't, just because we have no power, so we don't have absolute power. Let's put it that way.
I will agree with that.
Right. So I think I think we're basically saying the same thing, which is that, and then if you really look at it, then we have all these evidence-based approaches, which are probabilistic, which are more likely to result in what happens. But at the end of the day, there is some element that is outside of your control, and we don't have absolute power. Let's call it that. So then the question kind of becomes, okay, so then what are the strategies that you want to employ if you're a man today and you want women to like you? So I think the first thing, and this is where I kind of say, step away from the goal. So step away with the goal of getting this person. It sounds like you sort of call this the fear of loss, which is step away from that, right? Be who you are. You can plant a seed and you can water it every day, but you can't make it grow. The human beings, if you really look at what human beings truly have control over, we only have control over this. Everything else has some element of randomness to it. I cannot mind control another human being. I can barely mind control myself. And so this, I think, is the big thing, is that we get way too caught up. This is my approach, right? Is we get way too caught up in trying to get a girl to like me. And I think this is true, which is why you get to the same conclusion, is you focus on yourself. You focus on detachment from the outcome, and you focus on the task in the present, not where you want to go. So I think this may sound surprising, but maybe you know this because you've done your research, right? So if you ask me, like, what's my goal with Healthy Gamer and all the work that, I don't have one. I really don't. I just show up every single day because I have no idea if I'm going to be alive tomorrow. I do plan for the future because chances are, probabilistically, I will be alive, but I don't control life or death. I don't know if the world is going to end with a nuclear eruption tomorrow, or our magnetic poles are going to flip, or all manner of other things. What do I truly control? I just control what I do. The whole problem with people and women is that we spend so much time trying to control another human being. How do I get this girl to like me? How do I get my boss to promote me? How do I do this? How do I do this? How do this? We spend so much energy trying to control the thing that we fundamentally have the least control over, instead of focusing on, how do I control this? How do I turn this into the best possible version of what it is? And as you move in that direction, this is when dating will become way easier. So what happened with me is, not only did I get one girlfriend who eventually became a wife, but now I had even more detachment. So then when I was working in the hospital, suddenly like all these nurses and stuff started hitting on me. And I was like, what the fuck is this? I went through all of my adolescent and teenage years with women not batting an eyelash, even looking in my direction. They looked in the other way. And I realized that here I am, an authentic guy. I can afford to be smart. I can afford to be funny. I don't care what this girl thinks. I'm not trying to get with her. And suddenly this is when I start to attract other women. So I think practically what we need to do is, and I'm all for like falling in love and stuff like that, and then go for it, right? But even then there's some amount of detachment that you can cultivate. So that's what I did, which is sort of like acknowledging that I can, even though I'm love, I'm going to enjoy the experience, right? Let's see where this goes. And this may result in heartbreak, but that's part of life. I don't get to choose whether I get heartbroken or this person falls in love with me too. So that there's a lot of stuff that you don't control. Don't focus on that. Focus on yourself. And then I'm not saying that focus on yourself to the point of ignoring other things. Like, don't just focus, if you go to the gym every single day, but you never approach a woman, it's not going to work. So you have to take the actions, but you're not entitled to the fruits of your actions. So this is where I really sort of encourage people to don't worry about the fruit. So this is an Eastern concept called karma far. So karma means action and far means fruit. So all I'm entitled to in life is what I do. I don't get to control whether my company is successful or not successful, whether this podcast is successful or not successful. That's not in my control. It's not in your control. We can optimize things. We can prepare for them. We can cultivate all the right attitudes. But at the end of the day, who knows? There could be this power outage and everything, all the power goes out, and then we're SOL. So what you should really focus on, first of all, is don't get overly caught up in one particular person. If you feel love, just acknowledge it. Observe it. Notice how wonderful it is and how painful it is to be in love. Focus on what you can control. Focus on the actions. Observe yourself. And the last thing is to try to shed as much baggage as you can. Because all of your prior relationships will form things like resentments, conclusions, and you will project your past experience into current situations in your relationship, which will sabotage your relationship. Recognize that each person you are dating is a completely new person. And what I sort of see with people who are held back is they will interpret neutral stimuli in the dating world as negative based on their past experience. I texted this girl, she didn't text back in 10 minutes. That means she's not into me. We make all of these conclusions based on completely neutral stimuli. The reason she didn't text you back is maybe her phone died. Maybe her phone got stolen. There are all kinds of different things on the differential diagnosis. But it's the conclusions that we jump to in our mind that sabotages us the most.
What do you think the role of porn is in modern relationships?
I mean, bad is a short answer. So I don't really think about porn as tied to relationships. I know that's kind of
really
weird. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And tell me more.
So if we look at pornography addiction, okay, the science of it, everyone thinks that pornography is about lust, about relationships with women, and it can interfere with that. I've absolutely seen that. But let's understand like the neuroscience and clinical progression of pornography addiction. So first thing that's interesting with pornography addiction is pre-pubertal exposure to pornography. It's correlated with it, okay? So people start watching porn at a very young age when they don't even have the capability of an erection, or maybe they get an erection. It's the first erection. They have no idea what they're doing.
Do they masturbate?
Not usually at the beginning.
So it's just like whoa, this is weird.
Yeah. So if you look at, and this is based on my clinical experience, and we'll get to some things that are research based, but if you look at people, basically the earlier you get exposed to something, the more likely you are, your brain is still developing. It's still in its infantile stages. So the younger and more vulnerable the brain is, the more likely you are to get addicted. But when a 9-year-old watches pornography and their brain starts to change, this has nothing to do with women at this point, right? We'll get to how it can relate to relationships. So the second thing is that any addiction requires two things: the ability to give pleasure and take away pain. It has to have both. And if you really look at what pornography is really, really good at in the brain, it's not even the dopaminergic part. It's the suppression of our negative emotional circuitry. So pornography addiction is essentially an emotional regulation technique. That's really what the main thing that happens. Now, if you look at the research of it, what correlates with pornography addiction, so this is in adults, it's meaninglessness in life. So one of the two variables that is most tightly correlated with pornography addiction is having no reason not to watch porn. So you have to have a reason. And this is where when we focus on helping people with pornography addiction, we don't worry about relationships and things like that. We worry about building a life so that you can't sit home and watch porn all the time. Building alternative emotional regulation strategies, because porn is so good at it. So this is also something to understand, is that, see, the sex and the drive to procreate, you'll love this as a biological reductionist, is so powerful. So I tried to understand what part of the brain does sex affect. And there's a great reference which we can share with your audience if you all want. But it turns out that sex, like all the other parts of our, all other functions of the human mind are located in some part of the brain. So our frontal lobes do this, our occipital cortex does this, but sex is every part of the brain, every single neurotransmitter. So our whole brain is devoted to sex. So the thing about pornography is it has a whole brain effect. If we sort of look at even something like a man who has cancer, who's 80 years old, still is producing viable sperm, can get it up occasionally and can impregnate someone, right? So our whole biological evolution is designed for sex. And so as a result, this is why pornography addiction is so powerful, because you're recruiting all of these different parts of the brain in different ways. And so it's a very powerful emotional regulation technique. As an aside, if you look at the yogis, they say that one state of temporary enlightenment is orgasm. So if you look at the state of mind in orgasm, there's no thought. It's a transcendent state. We're not talking about post-nut clarity or pre-nut anxiety or whatever. That moment of orgasm is a no-mind state. You're not thinking anything. You're just in the moment fully, without attachment, without thought, with just pure bliss. That's why everyone's so addicted to it, because it's the quickest way to get to temporary enlightenment, right? Because it's blissful. And so then what you can do is you can practice meditation, and what you'll discover is through good meditation, you will essentially have protracted orgasms. It's the same state of mind, and it can feel amazing. But going back to pornography addiction, so it's a very powerful emotional regulator, really shuts off your amygdala and your limbic system, also releases some dopamine if you masturbate and achieve orgasm. But a lot of people who are addicted to pornography watch way more pornography, and it doesn't always end in masturbation or orgasm.
Wow.
Which is a lot of people don't know this. So it's really an emotional regulation technique. Now, over time, this can absolutely result in problems in relationships, but it's not early on. So I've seen all kinds of problems with relationships in pornography, but I don't think it's due to pornography addiction. So if you have a woman who's insecure, who feels like she can't satisfy all of her man's needs or things like that, and she has problems with him watching porn, that can cause problems. Pornography addiction can absolutely cause problems in relationships if men start to believe that pornography is some kind of correlation with relationships. If the women that you see in pornos, behave like real women in real life, you're going to get all screwed up in your relationships. But these are downstream effects. One really good example of this is I once had a really, sad case of a young college student who came to me and said, like, I have a problem is that I can't achieve a full orgasm. And then I asked him, what do you mean by you can't achieve a full orgasm? And he's like, I have I have the first stage of an orgasm, but I can't get like the full way there. And then it took me a while, I did psychotherapy and stuff. And then one day I removed all of my prior conceptions. And then I asked him, what do you mean by full orgasm? Help me understand, tell me what literally happens. Give me volumes. And the problem is this guy's watching pornography. he sees gallons of ejaculate, and he thinks that, and he has a normal volume of ejaculate, which is like 3 to 5 milliliters, and he doesn't even realize that he's having an orgasm and he's finishing.
That is hysterical.
Right? It's crazy. So you can see these kind of downstream effects, but basically pornography is just like any other addiction. It can affect relationships, but usually doesn't. I mean, it does impact relationships, but there isn't as direct of an impact as most people think.
It's really interesting. The porn addiction angle is definitely one that I'm not nearly as familiar. And so listening to you talk here and in the research I did is really, really eye-opening. I think there's another element to this. I'd love to get your take on it, is to want to risk putting yourself out there for a woman to reject. You've really got to be quite hungry. And I would say there's 2 motivating factors there. Somebody I want to share my life with, and sex. And I think sex, certainly for a young man, is such a potent driver that if you're at home and you're masturbating several times a week, I don't know that you're going to have the drive, especially if you've got video games staring at you and you know Friday night could be go to the bar, risk rejection, or stay home and play video games with my friends online, feel like an actual athlete, man. For people, if you've never played video games, like I am in my late 40s, and let me tell you, when I play video games, I feel like I am an athlete. I feel like I'm competing. I am playing to win. I've gotten good at something. It's incredible. So I can feel like an athlete and play this thing that I absolutely love. And I can see the most attractive naked women and have pseudo sex. Seems like a pretty good thing. When I combine that with the data on birth rates, it gets terrifying because birth rates are plummeting.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree. I think that like, so here's the basic problem with technology, right? And I recently wrote a book for parents that's coming out in a couple weeks, but so I think the basic problem with technology is that people have figured out how to give the brain what it always wanted in simpler ways, in less risk, in risk-free ways. So if we sort of look at all of this biological drive to have sex, why? It's because it was necessary for procreation. And it used to be hard to have an orgasm, right? It requires a partner, maybe, I don't know how
We're still
long.
talking about guys here?
What do you mean?
You think it was hard for guys to have an orgasm?
No, I mean, in the sense of like sexuality and stuff. So like, I mean, I know I was just wondering about, I don't know how many years ago human beings started masturbating. I imagine it was a long time ago.
Monkeys.
Monkeys, yeah.
Yeah.
So I realized I was about to make that comment. But so you have a lot of evolutionary drive to do this thing. And then what happens though is that I think that the way that pornography has grown, and if you look at all technologies, like, so you talked about, being an athlete. So the problem is that technology, people have figured out how to activate some parts of your brain. So you do get that dopamine kick. You do get like all of the, like not all, but you get like some level of activation, which is what really motivates you. And then the problem is that your brain has a choice. So I can either do it the hard way and get even less of a dopamine activation, or I can do it the easy, risk-free way. And it's really about the risk-free. And I think that's what you kind of really touched on with this whole idea of going to the bar and getting rejected, right? And at some point, your brain starts to say, like, it's not worth the trouble. And people will start to consciously believe that, right? That's why that's how they become incels or whatever. And so it just becomes, the world is becoming lopsided once technology enters the picture, because we can get 50% of our brain structures activated or even hyperactivated. There's a really fascinating study on beetles. There's a population of beetles that were going out of, not going extinct, but in a local area. And it turned out that the reason that they were becoming endangered is because they were having sex with beer bottles. And so people were like, this is really weird, but there's a particular green beer bottle which the beetles were trying to procreate with. And then people sort of discovered that, okay, there are ways to create something called a supranormal stimulus, which then these beetles are drawn to. So something about the way that they perceive this green beer bottle makes it look like a super hot female beetle. And in the same way, if you look at the trends in pornography, tits are getting bigger, higher resolution, louder sound, virtual reality. So we're creating these supernormal stimuli that are drawing us in. And now the brain has a choice. It's like, I can either have no risk for free at my home and jerk off, or I can go to a bar, try to talk to someone. It makes me feel, I get rejected, right? And then as I get a social skills atrophy, it starts to become harder and harder to engage with women. And then it becomes a vicious cycle where people then just tap out of the game. They're just done with it. And this is probably a piece of why we have low birth rates. But I don't think I think that's has other issues too.
Have you heard of the gooning subreddit?
Mm-mm.
There's at least 1 million. It might be multi-million people. So I'm just now learning about this. Utterly fascinating. So massive subreddit. Gooning is basically going into your bedroom or whatever, setting up oftentimes multi-screens and saying, I'm going to be here for a while, pulling up frequently multiple pornographic movies on the different screens, and basically trying to edge and make it last as long as you can. Now, from what I know in the literature about pornography, if you're spending that kind of time on pornography, that pornography is going to get weirder and weirder. And if I'm understanding the subreddit right, one of the most popular forms of pornography is transgender porn. And going back to the book, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, they talk about that as you habituate to the type of porn, you look for more and more extreme, novel, maybe an even better way to think about it. What do you think about that? What does that tell us about where we're headed?
So I think it's back to the beer bottles, right? So what we're doing is as we acclimatize to a particular stimulus, our dopamine levels will go down, right? So this is why people overdose when they get addicted to opiates, because the original dose doesn't work anymore because there's homeostatic tolerance. So I need to up the dose on the signal to chase that old high. Same thing happens with pornography. When I watch pornography every day, I acclimatize to the stimulus. I need more hardcore porn. So I think this is just the new version of that. It's going to keep going, by the way. So as you goon twice a week, you're going to need to do more, and you're going to need to do more, and you're going to need to do more. And that's just the nature of this kind of stuff. So there'll be transgender porn, there'll be more hardcore porn. We see this where there's like basically you need a stronger and stronger stimulus to chase that old dopaminergic rush. And it looks like people have sort of stumbled into this, right? And they're making it like an art form of gooning, where we're going to try to work together as a community of 1 million people to figure out how to squeeze as much dopamine as we can from this particular thing. So I think this is like exactly what I'm talking about, where like as a human race, like nuclear war is not going to fuck us. It's going to be stuff like haptic feedback and virtual girlfriends and things like that. And someone is going to figure out, and this is what happened with video games, someone is going to figure out that with an AI girlfriend, the way to really get someone addicted is we have to approximate the real experience as much as possible, which means once in a while, your AI girlfriend is going to pick a fight with you. And she's actually going to hang up on you when you call her. And they're going to exhibit, I don't know if this is true or not, but I would bet money that over time, this is exactly what we're going to see. And as we do that, we're activating other parts of the brain, and we're making this virtual experience approximate the real thing. Because I'm sure you're familiar with random reinforcement schedules, right? So right now, the problem with porn is that anytime I watch it, it's always available. The moment that someone figures out that denying someone their pornography 20% of the time means that they're going to come to your website more.
That's so crazy.
Right? So gooning is just one example. There's 1,000 other examples of how porn will evolve as long as we as human beings are going to rely on the outside world to satisfy this. It's just the most recent manifestation.
What do you think's really going to happen with AI girlfriends? Like, does it freak you out? Like, are you waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, because I know you have kids, and thinking, oh God?
No, I'm not waking up. I think it could be the end of the human race, but I'm not freaking out about it. Right? So if the human race ends, it ends. Like what, I can't control that. So like, this is where I'm not going to prevent, I can't stop the tide of AI girlfriends. In fact, I may have just leaked something that will, the first pornography site to start denying pornography to their users, they may figure this out. I may have helped them. But I think what's going to happen, so this is really interesting. In the late 90s, we developed an interesting technology in medicine called haptic feedback. And this was developed because we wanted to do remote physical diagnosis. So literally what happened is someone developed a glove where you could palpate a breast in one location, And then that glove sends signals to a different glove where the person feels the resistance. So you could literally feel like a cancerous nodule in someone else's breast remotely because it pushes against you. And we have these kind of like, things like fleshlights and stuff like that. And I think at some point, someone is going to combine all of this stuff into a girlfriend that throws temper tantrums, that is there for you, maybe even like kind of pretend cheats on you, and then has all this psychologically like activating stuff along with physical feedback, fleshlights, virtual reality. It'll all get integrated, and then the human race is fucked.
That's a very terrifying picture. What I find most interesting, I mean, there's two things. One, that you are because you can't control the outcomes, you are very fatalistic about what might happen. That's certainly interesting.
What do you mean by fatalistic?
That, the world might end or human race might end. So what? It is what it is.
So I'm trying to stop it, but I can't stop it.
You can't have absolute authority over whether it stops. Just to
Right.
play my own little game there with myself.
Yeah.
Yes. And then the other part that I find interesting is that I do think the stakes are extraordinarily high. I agree with you on that very much. But that you think a key part of making this all work is a lot of a certain percentage of negative things, that the AI girlfriend, to be effective, is going to pick a fight with you, that she's going to, you said, flirt with the idea that maybe she's cheated on you. Why would that up your attachment to it?
Because that's what happens in regular humans, right? So you think about this. So you have an amazing wife of 21 years?
Yeah, married 21.
Yeah, right? So like, and what would happen to you emotionally if someone else started not quite flirting, right? But started doing something to pull your wife's attention away from you. And she's not sending you any kind of signal that she's going to be unfaithful or anything like that. What do you think that would do to you emotionally and like to your attachment to the relationship?
Yeah, it's interesting for me, because that isn't my insecurity. My wife has done such an amazing job making me feel like her number one. That wouldn't make me insecure. I would be happy for her if someone is flirting with her and that she still got it and all that. But trust me, I am hyper aware of the psychological response of, if you think that your woman, like the studies show, if you believe that your woman has been near other men and had a chance to cheat, your ejaculate volume goes up substantially. So you get into sperm competition, and like this is part of the reason why male porn is way more likely to be multiple men and a single female, because that cue, going back to how you get into transsexual porn, even if you identify as a straight guy in these gooning subreddits, the male brain is hardwired to be hyper conscious of the presence of other penises, which is weird, but nonetheless true. So anyway, while I might have a mildly atypical conditioned response because of being with my wife for 21 years, I certainly get the thing. But that is really interesting.
So in this,
and distressing.
Yeah. So in this case, it's atypical, right? But you just cited a bunch of research that pushes it in the direction.
No, you're 100% right. I'm just super unnerved because it means that we're going to be knowingly triggering anxiety in people to get them to come back.
Jealousy, anxiety, and then oh my God, it goes even deeper than that, because she's gonna like start to cheat on you, but she won't ever do it, right? And then she's gonna say, "I'm so sorry. I should have paid attention to you more, and like I'll never do that again." And then it's such a mess. It's not just the jealousy. It's the jealousy followed by the unwavering commitment that I would never leave you. And that's going to be like a drug. I mean, this is what we're talking about, right? This is what all of our movies are about. All of our romance is about, this idea that she's going to be with you forever. And now we're way beyond pornography. Now we're into the core of humanity, which the study on ejaculate volume is fascinating. So this is what I mean. It's not just the jealousy, right? Then she's going to apologize. "I'm so sorry." And then imagine what that would do emotionally to the person when she's apologizing to you because she's hurt your feelings. AI girlfriends don't do that right now. Right now, they're all servile. They don't piss you off or anything like that. But if you look at what bonds human beings, this dynamic tension that you talked about. So someone's going to figure out how to add that to an AI girlfriend, and we will approximate reality closer and closer and closer. This is what we did with video games. Video games used to be single player. Now there's a community aspect. What a lot of parents that I work with don't understand is that games are no longer games. You can be a programmer, you can be a streamer. So games have moved into relationships, they moved into community, they moved into career, they moved into success. I had aspirations to go to Harvard when I was 16 years old, and now 16-year-olds have aspirations to be streamers.
Mm.
So technology is starting to approximate the real world and trigger these parts of our brain, and pornography is going to do it too.
Yeah, that is for sure. What advice do you give to people about going down the path of AI girlfriends? Avoid it like the plague. Don't even touch it. Never look at it. Or no, it's fine. It's like porn. As long as you're not addicted, you're good.
Yeah, so I think with all technology, it's just recognize that if you have a life that is worth living, the addiction will melt away on its own, right? So I had a video game addiction. We're a healthy gamer now. I teach my kids how to play video games. I play games with them. The whole point is that with these AI girlfriends, you're going to be vulnerable to that if you have no other substantial relationships, right? So I think the advice that I give to everyone is build a life that is worth living. And oddly enough, I don't even focus so much on the addiction because we have to have a solid foundation from which to combat addiction. And this is a big problem that a lot of people make. Even like, so they teach us this in addiction psychiatry that, if someone has depression, that is going to be fueling the addiction. And if they have an addiction, that's going to be fueling the the depression.
Mm.
So you have to do something called dual diagnosis treatment where you have to tackle both at the same time. So I think the biggest mistake that many people make with trying to overcome an addiction is that they are not acknowledging the factors in their life that are driving them towards the addiction in the first place. And you have to tackle those things, and then you can deal with the addiction way easier.
Let me ask, right now, I think that the tide of culture is sweeping men out to a cold, dark sea. What is it that's going wrong?
I think that the world has changed and we're not allowing men to change. So if you sort of look at it, right? So like we have a certain idea of what it means to be a man. And the expectations around for being a man have not changed, but the world has changed. So just as a simple example, I think 70 to 80% of women want the man that they date to earn more money than they do.
Mm-hmm.
But 60% or more of people who graduate from college are women. So like the world is changing, but we're not sort of adjusting expectations for men. That's problem number one. I think problem number two is that men are, as a class, the only group that we do not allow to suffer. So there's sort of this idea that men are privileged, which there's data for in a lot of ways. But the problem, and this is just my work as a psychiatrist, so like, I work with a lot of men who are suicidal. And one of the crazy things that we assume is that if you're suicidal, it means you're mentally ill.
Mm.
But when I was going through residency, like I started out assuming all the men who I worked with who were suicidal were mentally ill. But as I started to become familiar with mental illness, I quickly found that like the majority of men that I work with who are suicidal are not actually mentally ill. They have no malfunction of their mind. Their life is so genuinely difficult that it just becomes logical to choose suicide as like your only option, because to stay in the life that you have today is completely untenable.
Can I just draw a line into that for a second? Okay, so it's your life is so bad that it is logical to contemplate suicide. That's super terrifying. Tell me more. How? So the expectations of men, that's certainly one thing. What, for it to be logical to contemplate suicide, a lot more things are going to have to be piled on them.
Yeah. So let's just start. So when I first stumbled upon this, I was like, maybe I'm wrong. So I looked at the research and it's staggering. But one study, for example, shows that 50% of men who commit suicide have no history or evidence of mental illness. So if we sort of look at it, right, we assume that this is like a malfunction, that people aren't seeing things clearly. But as I've worked with a lot of men who are very suicidal, their lives, they just feel incredibly trapped and incredibly alone. And these are people that if you look on the outside, you would look at these people and they would be incredibly successful. These are people like bankers at places like Goldman Sachs. Like they have everything that many people envy. And so it can be very confusing to think, why is this person complaining? And then we create a really dangerous ground, because if you're in a place where you're not allowed to complain, then suddenly if you're struggling in some way and you try to share something with other people, you say, hey, I'm struggling. And then people say, but what are you complaining about? You're privileged. You're lucky. You make so much money. You're so tall. You're so handsome. You have no right to complain. And the moment that we remove that, then this person has no way to get their suffering actually addressed. And oftentimes what I find is that, men are not only do we create this kind of situation, but that we expect men to do a lot of things that are like very dangerous, and we expect men to be self-sacrificing. Um, so it's like women and children first, which I'm not against that as a rule of thumb, by the way. It's just that if we're doing this to men, we should at least acknowledge it. So like I remember when I was a second year resident working on an inpatient unit on a schizophrenia unit. So these are where people are actively psychotic or actively manic. So they're like hallucinating, they're violent. Anytime there's a violent patient, I was working in a hospital with 4 other physicians. We were all on the same floor, and the other 4 physicians were women. And anytime there's a violent patient, it's an unspoken rule that the women step back and the men step forward. There's literally unspoken. No one ever said, hey, because you're a man, you have to step forward. What would happen is someone from the staff would come and get me, and then I would step into the room with the other men. So we sort of expect men to sacrifice. And it's kind of weird, because you're not allowed to say as a man, like, I don't want to do that, right? You're not even allowed to say this is hurtful to me or dangerous to me or unfair in some way, because you're privileged, which in a lot of ways you are as a man. Like I certainly have grown up with a lot of privilege. So I think that there's just a nuance there, that everyone is so black and white with the way that we sort of think about the experience of men, that there's no space for the suffering that men experience.
Okay, I think this is really profound. There's a lot of different threads to pull on here. So would it be fair in your mind to categorize, there's 2 kinds of problems that we have. We've got inside problems, we've got outside problems. So outside problems, social media, changing expectations of women going up and holding their expectations the same. Then we've got the inside problem, which is I have all the success that anyone could want. People envy me, but I still don't feel good. And I could process through that if somebody would only let me talk about it, but I'm not able to talk about it. And so now I'm in a death loop of, there probably is an answer because my life is pretty good, but it doesn't feel good because I can't process.
Yeah. So even in that, we see another challenge. So like you say, well, we're not allowed to talk about it. So there's like another really simple thing that I recently realized, which is if you look at the field of psychiatry, the field of psychiatry has all kinds of gender related biases. And let's remember that just because we're biased in one direction towards a particular gender does not mean that there can be a concurrent bias against a different gender. So we're biased against women in psychiatry for particular reasons. Like a really good example of that is the hormonal fluctuations and how they impact mental health. So we sort of think about diagnoses as static. Like once you have ADHD, you have ADHD. But there's a ton of data that shows that menstrual cycles basically affect all symptoms of all mental illnesses. But that's not something that any of us are taught in medical school, let alone psychiatry residency. So, but if we kind of go to men, so a really good example is that this idea that talking about your emotions is the gold standard of processing them. So if you look at the history of psychiatry, 70% of patients are women, 70% of therapists are women. And so I started to discover as I worked with more and more men that there are even studies about this. So if you look at studies of couples counseling, the reason that men are reluctant to go to couples counseling is because they are not good with verbal expression of their emotional state. So anytime they go into couples counseling, they feel outgunned because this is a heterosexual couple. Their female partner is able to like articulate their emotional experience better, and it feels like the therapist ends up understanding and siding with the female partner more. So like as men, we just don't talk about our emotions. And this is where the society jumps to a conclusion and says, okay, so this is a problem that you guys have as men. You need to learn how to talk about your emotions more. But therein lies the bias. we never stop to ask ourselves, hold on a second. If men are not very good at talking about their emotions, are there different ways to manage emotions? And if you look at historically the way that men manage emotions, we have all kinds of things that are different. We are much more physical, and that's viewed as a negative thing, right? To be like, instead of being physical, like, you need to talk about your problems. If you have a problem with someone, you should articulate it out. So already we're starting to see that the way that our society judges particular things, we place articulation of emotions above physical expression of emotions.
Have you heard Jordan Peterson's quote on this?
Mm-mm.
I'll paraphrase it, but I think I'm pretty close to verbatim. Women have probably done to men what humanity did to wolves.
What does that mean?
The unsaid thing is domesticated. That when I hear you talk, and if this is inaccurate to what you're trying to convey, definitely stop me. But this is my worldview, that women are a civilizing force. And the more we unleash women to achieve, be in every element of society, they've got birth control. They're no longer forced through biological necessity to stay much closer to the home, that you will see that civilizing force really become extreme. Now, that sounds awesome until it becomes pathological. So I'm a big believer that you need dynamic tension between two opposing forces, and that's actually how society moves forward. So male and female, opposing is probably the wrong word, but that gets you close enough. They are very different, and you want that dynamic tension between the two. You don't want either one to be in complete control. And anybody that's researched the like Mongol takeover of the known world, it's like when masculinity gets completely pathological, we're just going to kill everybody in this village. So for sure, there is a place where that goes, where it becomes pathological. Now, what I think is happening right now is that we're seeing feminine pathology come into play, where men are being told that their sort of way of being, I'll even back it off. The structures are just made in a way that reward a female mode of existence. So whether that's school and you're able to sit down, pay attention, you mature a little faster, all of that, or just don't be aggressive, don't speak physically, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot there that I agree with, and some there that I wouldn't characterize it that way. So I think the main disagreement that I have is, women did to men what humans did to wolves. I don't think it's women that did it, right? So this is where I think there's a very common attitude, which is that if things are biased against men in some way, that the women are to blame, or feminism is to blame, or the decay of the whatever particular thing is to blame. So my experience as a psychiatrist is that it's never that simple. So everything is multifactorial. And we men are responsible for the world that we live in just as much as the women are. So I don't, that's the only part that, like, so I work with a lot of people, for example, who are incels. And incels are a great example of, like, if someone else suffers, they deserve compassion. But incels are the one group of the population that, and they also trigger this because of the way that they use language and stuff. They're not, they really incite people to dislike them because they say a lot of very dislikable things. And at the same time, these are people that are struggling in some way, and they will demonize women for their problems. The majority of women, the majority of incels I've worked with, their problem is themselves just as, or even more so than the women. They have so many cognitive biases that they blame women for this, they blame women for this. And that's not like that's a foolish way to go through life. Because the moment that you blame women for your problems, you lose control over your life. You don't take responsibility because you can't control women. You can't control anything outside of yourself. And so that's why incels sort of spiral so hard, is because they're misdiagnosing their problem. See, if the problem is women, you can't change what they do or what they think or anything like that. So then you surrender control to this external force, and then you're screwed. So the only thing that I kind of disagree with is the attribution that women sort of did this intentionally, because it's not like they're a monolithic cult that has meetings and plans to domesticate men. I don't, that hasn't been my experience. Maybe that's going on, but.
Okay, so I think there's a really interesting dynamic you're bringing up. So I think it is important that people come to at least a hypothesis, which is all I will say that I have. And for people that have never heard this explained before, I will differentiate between a hypothesis, a thesis, and something I consider a fact. So a hypothesis is basically a guess, hopefully an informed guess. A thesis is every other hypothesis has fallen away, and this is the last one that remains invalidated. And then a fact is like, if you do this thing, you're going to get this outcome predictably every time. Okay, so if we're willing to sort of take that, know that I'm at the hypothesis end, which is why I'm so interested in bringing people on to talk about the subject. I see things going in the wrong direction. I see male suicide rates and female suicide rates, quite frankly, going up. I see more girls cutting themselves, more men actually committing suicide, depression, anxiety rates literally skyrocketing. I mean, absolutely insane. And that is the tip of a very large iceberg of data about things that I will say point to a decline in human flourishing, which for any longtime listeners of my show know that's my North Star. So every word out of my mouth is predicated on that's where I'm trying to get to. So I see all this data that says, okay, we're moving in the wrong direction. In fact, I will quote you. The only area of medicine that is moving backwards is mental health. So, hey, all this amazing modern stuff. But something is wrong because mental health is going in the exact wrong direction. At the time of sort of peak everything okay, everything should be okay. Okay, so here's my hypothesis on this. So my hypothesis is that men have become domesticated. Maybe not by women, though my hypothesis would be women play a huge role in this, that the birth control pill plays a huge role in this, that women, as somebody who's been married for 21 years and believes that my wife is the best thing that has ever happened to me, and the amount of domestication she has introduced in my life has been incredible. So I don't want people to hear me mischaracterizing women, which I think are amazing, but a domestication has happened. I have a hypothesis that I will simply plant now, but maybe we don't talk about it right now. I think for society to work well, people have to be chased by a lion. Metaphorical is fine, but they need some lurking danger that they have to contend with constantly. So you've got domestication, the eradication of most sort of lions at the door, and if we can, and many other things, social media being a huge one, just the general internet age, the velocity and volume of information, changing social mores, the pill. I mean, it is a mountain of things that have happened. But those things, if not accurately identified as causal, then we will never be able to figure out what the path out is. So to speak to an incel, I think identifying a change in women and the way that they interact with the world is accurate. It is accurate even to say that that creates a problematic dynamic that has to be negotiated and figured out. It does not mean that it's anybody's responsibility other than their own to navigate that well.
Okay. So it's so interesting how I agree with so much of what you so there are premises that I agree with. I come to different conclusions. And there are conclusions that I agree with, but I come from different premises. So let me start by this. What do you mean by domestication?
I think that these are averages. Men are more risk-taking. Men are more driven. Men will do more extreme things to garner the attention of a woman. Men tend to be more aggressive. They tend to, at least in the narrow snapshot of humanity where we have recorded history well, men have been encouraged to be militaristic, to conquer, to be strong. And even though the scope of that went from conquering the known world to cities, to your job, to just making sure that you protect your household, it's been the same idea, but it really has been sort of this ever shrinking circle. And as somebody who reads about history obsessively, people will be hard pressed to convince me that that isn't the story of history.
So what you're saying by domestication is that like we used to be more militaristic, but there isn't stuff to conquer anymore.
It's probably better to look at the individual and say the value system that we encouraged men to adopt I would say was very in line with their biology. And while at times, again, from a historical perspective, at times so appalling that I'm not saying just because something is that it ought to be, history is appalling. I mean, it will curl your eyelashes. It is insane. But nonetheless, so the domestication is, and if you, I mentioned this before we started rolling, there's a book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts. In that book, they put forth that basically the central tenet of female sexual desire is to tame a man, to tame the best man. It's the Beauty and the Beast myth, that he is a beast that is locked away in his castle, and I'm the only one that's able to break through and see his heart. And so men become integrated only through the female touch. It's actually a great story and pretty close to reality, I would say. So I think there is an amount of domestication that's positive, and I think we've now spilled over into pathology.
Okay, so and by domestication, you mean the curbing of militaristic or aggressive tendencies?
I swore I was not going to let you flip this interview around on me because I know you are so good at this.
No, I just want to understand the language that you're using. I'm not trying. Or if you want to flip it, I can do that too. But that I'm leaving on the backside. That's on the back burner, right? So if you want to flip it, the question that I have is, you made this kind of interesting statement that, you know, your wife is the best thing that happened to you. And it's kind of like, as we talk about men's issues, you'll notice this. We as public figures cannot talk about men's issues without commenting about how women are awesome.
Don't you think that's important?
I think it's important. I think it's very important, because what would happen if you didn't say that?
I would mislead people. So here is my goal. Nothing has given me more joy in my life by a country mile. And this is somebody who's made a lot of money, been celebrated, all that. Nothing has brought me as much joy as sharing a life with my wife. I mean, just unbelievable, orders of magnitude better than everything else. So I'm trying to acknowledge what's happened and say, okay, like now that we know, and now that we know having an adversarial relationship with women would be the dumbest possible thing you could do, red pill community, I'm talking to you. You want a partner, you want an equal.
So I just want to just chime in about the red pill community. So I think one thing, since we're talking about men's issues, thank you so much for explaining that, by the way. That was great. So I think the interesting thing is, everyone talks about the rise of like toxic masculinity, right? So there's really only one place. Remember, I always said men are not allowed to suffer. So I think one of the things we have to remember is that if something is rising within our society, there's almost like a Darwinian pressure for that thing to rise. So everyone can sort of decry toxic masculinity, which, by the way, I don't know how to define really, because it seems that we define toxic masculinity as that about men or a particular man, which I do not like in this moment. That's the most universal definition that I've been able to understand as a psychiatrist, because there's a lot of disagreement. But if we kind of look at the red pill community, the interesting thing about the red pill community is they're the only community that allows men to suffer. So if a man today says, I am struggling, the most common thing that they hear in return is that you are privileged, you should not be struggling. Which also, by the way, is an interesting bias about the way that we treat men, which is that men are designed to be, the masculine ideal is independent, right? And to not need help from someone else. So the interesting thing is that the red pill community is the only community that says, if you're struggling, yeah, you are struggling because you suck, right? And like, they're the only ones that say, yes, your life is hard. Here is a way to make it better. And so I think one of the biggest problems that we see with men right now is that they have nowhere else to go where someone at least accepts the premise that your life is hard. Now, I think there's a lot of toxicity that comes out of the red pill community because it's born. I've worked with a lot of incels and red pillers and things like that. And I think that, you know, it's almost textbook, like avoidant attachment kind of theory sort of stuff. And literally every single one that I've worked with has had some kind of incredibly traumatic experience with a woman that they then generalize to women as a whole, which I think is a big mistake. So I just wanted to kind of toss that in. But going back to your hypothesis, I think the main thing that I would kind of say is that I just don't operate at the level that you do. So you're kind of thinking about historic things, which I'm a big fan of history and things like that. But, you know, my clinical practice is an individual. And what I've sort of found is that even if, and I agree with some of these trends that you're discussing, right? So we as a society have become less aggressive, for sure. But I tend to find that there's a lot of individual variability that at the same time mirrors some of the trends that we've talked about, like, so the increase in suicidality rate, the worsening of mental health. So I think there's kind of global trends. And the reason that I don't quite jump on board with some of your conclusions is because there's a lot of individual variability. But I think that's just,
Give me the things that you think I'm most off base about.
um, man, so many things. So for example, like I don't remember them now, but just as an example, so like you know, if you look at even if we look at the Mongols, so I don't know that I would agree that what the Mongols did is a manifestation of masculinity gone awry,
Interesting.
right? So why do
How
we
would
say
you characterize the Mongol
I
ruler?
have no idea, but why is it gender related? Right? So out of culture, religion, sociopathy of their leader,
Mm,
a lack of empathy, you know, cultural divisions, a culture that perhaps has been trampled by other cultures and has bred hate for a very long period of time. That's kind of my point, is that I think that it's like, I'm not saying that it isn't masculine. I'm just saying that I don't, I have not studied Mongol invasions. So I've studied a lot of invasions, like of the Indian subcontinent and things like that. And there have been like invaders, right? There's the Crusades. There's Qutbuddin Aybak, who came from Turkey into like northern India. There's all these like Mughal invaders who basically destroyed a lot of temples and things like that. And you could say that that's masculinity, right? You could make an argument for it. But I think there's just so many other cultural, ethnic, religious forces at play that I wouldn't just jump to that conclusion.
interesting. So just to put a point on that, I would say I could at least give you I will briefly give you the reasons why I think that it is tied to masculinity, though I agree wholeheartedly with something you said earlier, which is none of this is single factorial. This is
Yeah.
always going to be incredibly complicated. However, so I have a base assumption that everything, and this is ultimately, you and I are going to get into this, I think later in the interview would be better. I am a complete materialist. So your brain drives your behavior, your biology drives your behavior. And while I completely agree with you that at the level of the individual, you almost can't make any predictions whatsoever. But at the population level, things become a mathematical certainty. So that's me paraphrasing a very famous quote about men. Basically, any individual man is a complete mystery, but men at the population level are a mathematical certainty. That I agree with. And so anyway, without
So
derailing on Mongol
no, I
history.
mean, I think so. That's it's a great example of so many things that I agree with and so many things that I disagree with. So one simple thing is that things are multifactorial, but that doesn't mean that we can't understand them, right? So I think that stuff can be incredibly understood very, very well, despite the fact that they're multifactorial. I completely agree that population-based stuff gets us closer to quote unquote truth than individuality. So I'm with you there. But I think there's also like other examples of you know, gender. So for example, like if we look at men as being masculine, there are ways of conquering that aggressiveness that men have done historically for thousands of years. A simple example is a yogi, right? So the simple idea of a man who is very, very happy, content, doing well in life is sort of like, you know, I even ideally happy. You could look at someone like Buddha, who attained moksha, presumably, or enlightenment. And I think that's kind of so I just don't know how that, when you make some of the statements that you make, I don't know how those kinds of examples fit into your worldview. I'm not saying you're wrong by any means, but you know, when you're talking about this mathematical global idea of like what men are and aggressiveness, like I'm just really curious how you reconcile that with the idea of someone like a Buddha or a monk.
Probably be an easier question. Let me first ask, do you believe that men have a nature, again, on average, any individual, this may not hold true to, but do you believe that they have a nature on average that is different than the female nature?
Undoubtedly.
Okay. So then this will become, for us to figure out a path forward, which I think is what we both share. I have a base assumption that drives all of my thinking, which is that 50% of biology is, or 50% of the way you are is the hardwiring of your biology. I think 50% of the way you are is changeable and malleable, and I spend the vast majority of my life looking at the 50% that's malleable. But I think that part of the disconnect in the modern era is there is a subset of people who believe that you can divorce your theories, your policies, your treatment of men or women, and completely divorce it from a biological reality. And so my thing is just, hey, whatever your hypothesis, thesis, fact is, if it isn't in alignment with biology, we have an innate problem. And so going back to the idea that this all started because I was characterizing the modern moment that we're living in terms of what the female personality type, that's a probably really lame way of summing this up, but when that becomes pathologized and it becomes all about reputation savaging, it becomes about trying to overly mother, remove all obstacles, make sure there are no lions, et cetera, it creates a problem. The only reason I brought up the other stuff was so people don't think, I think, well, guys are perfect and women are now fucking things up. I'm just saying, hey, this you want them both in a dynamic tension between the two of them. And when you have that, it's amazing. When you don't, it can become pathological in either direction.
Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And by the way, this is a fantastic conversation, dude. Tom, you are something else, man.
That is exceedingly kind. All right. So to make this all useful, so we sort of agree on some things, disagree on other things, but our real goal right now is to figure out, okay, there are a set of problems. Guys really are going through a hard time.
Absolutely.
I think you and I both agree that it's like, hey, I don't care how or why the deck is stacked against you. Probably good to identify those things because it will help inform how you're going to get out of this. It's up to you to get out of this. Hating women, being a dick, that's not going to help you. So, one, do you feel like the table is set in terms of the major problems? Because we've sort of only touched on social media a little bit.
So I think so. I mean, I think so, despite the fact that, I'm focusing on individuality. And I think for the lion's share of things, I think we're on the same page that there is a global change that's happening, especially as it relates to gender dynamics. Men are getting crushed in a lot of ways, that a lot of these are societal forces, which is why we're seeing men as a population suffer, right? So for men to suffer, there must be a systemic problem, in my opinion anyway. People will disagree with that, which I think is part of the problem, is that we are willing to acknowledge systemic problems for ethnicities and genders except for men, which I think is the systemic problem. So I think that no one is really debating that, for example, if you look at, I remember I worked in a jail for a few months, and it took me 3 weeks before I saw my first Caucasian patient working in a jail.
Whoa.
And so that was, I realized one day, like I walked in and I was like, something is different today. Like, what is it? And that's when I realized I've gone 3 weeks without seeing a single Caucasian person. So when we look at things like that, we're very quick as a society to say that, it's not that people who are non-Caucasian are criminals. We don't think that has to do with their ethnicity or anything like that. We've figured out that there are socioeconomic factors, there's systemic factors which are responsible for crime. But when it comes to things like men and violence, there is an overwhelming sort of belief that the reason that the majority of people in jail are men is not because of a systemic bias, it's because men are biologically more violent. Right. So people will make that argument very much. So what I sort of see, one of the biggest challenges I see with men is that we as a society are not willing to afford men the same status as a class as we do for other people who need help. And that in turn is partially because there are very many very successful men. Right. So if you look at the people who have the most money, the most power, whatever, those will predominantly be men. But we don't sort of acknowledge that still the majority of people who suffer from addictions, the majority of people who kill themselves, like 80% of people who kill themselves are men. And somehow we as a society have difficulty reconciling these two things. So I think we agree there. And then I think we also agree that there's a lot of individual focus and responsibility to deal with the world that we're in. So I think we're like completely set. Fair?
Yeah, I just have one question in what you just said. So, do you think that men's propensity for violence at the extreme of the bell curve has anything to do with the incarceration rate discrepancy between men and women?
Has anything to do? Undoubtedly.
If you had to swag a percentage.
Small.
Really?
Yeah.
So what's the major driving factor in your mind for why more men end up in prison? It's just that the society makes it impossible for them to deal with their emotions, which drives them to drugs and alcohol,
I mean,
which
that's
makes them violent?
probably a little bit beyond my scope, like to answer, but just to give you all a simple example. So we look at abuse, right? So we criminalize physical abuse and sexual abuse more than emotional abuse. But my experience as a psychiatrist is that physical abuse is not actually more damaging than emotional abuse. So I think I would want to say that the majority of mental health professionals out there would agree with this, that it's not like physical abuse is objectively worse than emotional abuse. So if we sort of look at the ways in which there are gender specific ways in which people will express violent tendencies. So ostracization, emotional abuse versus physical abuse. So men are more physical and we tend to criminalize that more. We also criminalize, for example, the way that men deal with emotions is oftentimes through substances. So men use something called emotion focused coping, which is that if they feel a particular thing, they will do something externally to change the way that they feel. And so this is also something that we sort of even champion as men, right? So if you feel ashamed of yourself, you should go and do something in the world so that you can have more pride, you can hold your head up high. It's not, the shame doesn't get fixed in here. It gets fixed by changing your circumstances. This is also what opens men up to manipulation, because if someone can make you feel guilty as a man, I'm making you feel guilty. The way that you're supposed to deal with that is to make more money because I'm calling you not a real man because you're not providing. So there's a lot of like men basically manage their emotions using the external world. And I think when we have that kind of situation, we are more likely to end up engaging in like criminal activity. The fact that we criminalize substance use, the majority of substance users are men. Um, so things like that. So I think it's like, I don't know exactly if that answers your question, but I don't think it comes down to simple aggression. So just to give you an example. So, I worked with a patient who was 19 years old and was in jail. And so I asked him, I was like, tell me about yourself. And he wasn't upset about being in jail. It seemed very natural to him. So I asked him, I was like, so help me understand that. And he's like, well, when I was 12 years old,
Before you say that, can I make a guess?
yeah,
They grew up poor.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think everyone at home is going, yeah, that's obvious, that's self-evident. That's the point.
No. So here's the difference. So he grew up poor, but so did his three sisters, right? They're all in the same family. Why did he end up in jail? Because his sisters told him when he was 12 years old and dad left the house. When he was 12 years old, sisters told him, you're a man, you have to provide. That's what a man does. And so how does a 12-year-old boy provide for his family? He starts selling drugs. So in and out of juvie and things like that for selling drugs, because he's a 12-year-old, now has a profession which school does not prepare you for. He has no mentorship. So he's kind of like in this life of crime, and this is how he ends up in jail, because it's his job as a 12-year-old boy to provide for his family of four, right? Three sisters and one mom. And this too is where people will say, okay, like the problem here is absent fathers and things like that, which you can make a very strong argument for. I'm not disagreeing. We can even see that in the animal kingdom. So for example, if you look at elephants, juvenile male elephants who grow up in tribes of elephants that don't have senior males will exhibit a lot more aggressive and delinquent behavior. So this is very biological. At the same time, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the circumstances of dad leaving the house, I think we are quick to blame dad for leaving, but we don't know the circumstances that dad was living in. We don't know why he left or what caused him to leave or whatever, right? So in this particular case, I guess I can't say. So it was false accusations of sexual assault, right? And so if you're in that kind of situation where one of your daughters is falsely accusing you of sexual assault, it gets real ugly real fast. So you have no choice but to run.
Woof. That's terrifying. you should know the following three numbers: 37,000, 25, 1. 37,000, that is the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year, so you know that they know what they're doing because they've been around for a long time. That is 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1. Because your business is truly one of a kind. So you're going to need a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth, which you will get from NetSuite. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow, all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free at netsuite.com/theory. That's netsuite.com/theory to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/theory.
Okay, so it's a very important insight on all the other ways that the masculine tendencies can have you end up in jail. All right, so if we call the table largely set for the problems against men, how now, since we both agree that this ultimately is their responsibility, even if it's not their fault, it's their responsibility to build a way out of this, what is the way out?
So I think the first thing, and this is kind of true of all people, so I don't think this is specific to men. So the stage is set. You said it beautifully, Tom. The stage is set for men, right? This is the world that we live in. But whether the stage is set this way or any other way, your responsibility as an individual is the same. You have to you have to play the hand of cards that you're dealt. So I think one of the biggest things that men need to do is understand themselves. And this is not just men, this is everyone. So I think if you look at the biggest problem in our society today, it's that we have a lot of formal training of everything outside of a human. So we'll teach you math, we'll teach you economics. The real crazy thing is, even if you major in psychology, right, you'll learn about populations, you'll learn about studies, you'll learn about, in general, the way that human beings tend to behave, but you won't learn about yourself. So the basic reason I think mental health is moving in the wrong direction is that the institutional powers that understand human behavior, our understanding of human behavior on the scientific or population level has grown so sophisticated, but our understanding of ourselves within us has come to an all-time low. So a simple way to put it is, let's look at something like pornography. The people who make pornography understand how to addict someone, but we do not give kids or adolescents training to understand why they get addicted to pornography or what goes on internally that allows one human being to become addicted. So we have advertisers who understand body dysmorphia and how to induce body dysmorphia in people on social media. But as a human being, we are not trained in understanding our ego, our sense of self, where my sense of identity comes from. So we have a huge amount of, there's even something called like neuroeconomics, right? So which is like using neuroscience to understand how to influence human behavior. So there's all this kind of stuff there that we've become so sophisticated scientifically that the individual in today's society is just completely outgunned. This is why you have people who will doom scroll. They know they don't want to spend 8 hours on their phone. That they wake up and they say, I don't want to do this. I had that problem where I would wake up and I didn't want to play video games all day. I just did not know how to resist it. Whereas the people who are designing games, not quite true back then, but is more true now, know how to keep you on when you don't want to stay on. So there's a fundamental power imbalance between people who develop things like technology in their understanding of the self. And we're like, they're armed with nuclear weapons and we're armed with sticks in terms of understanding ourselves. And once you understand yourself and how you work, that I think is the ultimate salvation for like basically any problem.
Okay, so know thyself is step number one. What is the process to come to understand yourself?
I mean, that's such a great question. I don't know. So I think awareness and observation are like the core of it. But I think generally speaking, we have things like spiritual traditions in which we are trained in this. So that's what happened with me. is that in the same way that we learn about mathematics or science or history, right? We have formal processes of studying things outside of ourselves. In our society today, we've sort of lost sight of the formal process of internal study, which involves lots of steps. But that's basically, so I would kind of say like yoga is a really good example of this, of like a formal system to understand how you work as a human being. Where do your desires come from? Where does willpower come from? Why do you wake up on a particular day and feel sluggish? Why is there a variability in your performance?
You get that from yoga?
Absolutely.
Tell me more. I did yoga once. I did not enjoy it. Meditation, I love. I thought you were going to say meditation for sure.
Meditation is a part of yoga.
Okay.
So let's understand. So this is the other problem, is that there's a misunderstanding of a lot of terms. So yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj. Yuj is yoke, or like yoke, not like Y-O-L-K, like the inside of an egg, but that which binds. So yoga is the practice of becoming unbound from that which binds human beings. So it is
what binds human beings?
An inability to recognize that we are divine is a simple way to put it. So if you sort of talk about, like, if we look at Buddha attained enlightenment. What is that? We're not really sure. I can go into detail if you want, but there's basically like this process through which human beings will attain some kind of psychological, spiritual, whatever state where they are all-knowing and happy. Jury's out on all-powerful. But so we'll say, we'll say that avidya, or ignorance, is the source of our suffering. So this is what binds us to this world. And if you kind of think about, like, I'm sure this has happened in your life, where like a lot of your suffering and your lack of success, which by the way went hand in hand, was because you did not understand something about yourself, right? And once you understood, I've been living my life in the wrong way. I've been looking at things in the wrong way, right? So you're a big fan of mindset. And so if we sort of think about it, like, that's really interesting, because we're not actually changing anything, right? You're not acting in a different way. There may be a consequence of action, but the start of it is a change in your perception, what goes on internally, which increases your happiness, reduces your suffering, improves your performance. But fundamentally what it is a shift in mindset. It's like the light bulb going off. So we suffer because we have a lot of avidya, or ignorance. We don't really know who we are. We don't really know how the world works. And so we're going through life deaf, blind, and dumb, and then no wonder things aren't working out. So the process of being able to see, being able to hear, and being able to speak is yoga. So yoga is the search for the path to enlightenment, basically. And meditation is one piece of that. And then the postures that we do in yoga studios, that's asana. So it's one of the 8 parts of yoga.
Got it. I was going to say, we're going to have some guys go roll up to a Bikram yoga class and expect enlightenment and walk out very confused.
Yeah, so you can get enlightened through just asana, but it's very difficult. You have to have a very good teacher.
Interesting. Okay. Man, I know I'm asking you to break down something that is just impossibly large, but if you had to give us a thumbnail sketch of the process of unbinding yourself from the thing that closes our eyes to our divinity, what would that process be?
So process, I can tell you, it's not going to make sense, but I can tell you. So the first thing is that we have to understand like what we are. So let me ask you, Tom, because now I know I'm answering questions, but I can't answer this. So you're going to have to answer for us. Okay.
Okay.
So what are you?
Human.
What does that mean?
I am a collection of cells that operate in a certain way that we all recognize as human. I don't know how deep you want me to go on that.
That's deep enough. How do you know that?
I exist within what I call a frame of reference. My frame of reference is built upon beliefs and values. I have a core belief that I
can stop you right there. So let's understand a couple of things. Do you know you're made of cells?
Man, I could pass a lie detector that yes, I know I'm made of cells.
How?
Yeah. So I have I mean, do we want to jump straight to we're living in the Matrix, or do you? Because we can go step by step. I can give you answers.
We don't need to jump anywhere. I'm asking you. Let's like, 'cause you're asking what is the.
I think your punchline is going to be you don't know anything.
No. Forget about punchlines and where we're going. Forget about all that.
I will simply answer the questions. I know that I'm made of cells because I have done enough research that I believe in, and given my own tactile experience of.
Okay. So then you also say that you have core beliefs, values, whatever, right? So you're a very well built human being. So, but when you say I have core beliefs and values, what is the I?
The I is the locus of consciousness that feels like a writer inside of my body.
Okay. So what is that locus of consciousness that feels like a writer inside of your body?
It is, and this will be very controversial, I don't find consciousness to be interesting, but that's probably because I'm too dumb. I'm willing to accept that. But consciousness seems self-evidently the stacking of brain, microbiome, potentially heart cells, up, until the way that they process information includes a feedback loop of assessment. So it is both processing the data and looking at the data that it's processing. We read that as qualia, meaning the world feels a way. But to me, that's just a simple feedback loop. And I can go in and damage regions of your brain and it will go away.
Absolutely, right? So we can stimulate the temporoparietal junction of your brain. That will trigger an out-of-body experience. We can damage different parts of the brain. So for example, we can do bilateral amygdalar lesions, and you will no longer experience loss aversion. You won't feel fear. We can alter your experience of consciousness by making changes to the brain. Ergo, you conclude that the consciousness is some kind of fictional hallucination born of the brain?
Fictional rubs me the wrong way for a reason I have not explored. It doesn't feel accurate. So I think it simply is what happens when you configure cells in the way that we are configured with a layer of abstraction. Your brain is running algorithms. Algorithms' jobs are to not show you things as much as they show you things, and then to tell you how you feel about the things that you see, which have an insane feedback loop based on your personal experience. And oh God. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I think that's a good enough answer. We don't need to go beyond that. So like you have this subjective experience, right, of consciousness or whatever, whether it's born of neurons or whatever, that's a debate for philosophers. You asked me the question, what is the process to remove avidya, to remove ignorance and understand who you are? So we don't need to know the science of it because people did that long before we understood that there were cells or neurons or anything like that. So the process doesn't require any scientific understanding. So now the question kind of becomes, so you have this experience, right? But if you kind of think about it, the experience gets colored. So it can be colored or influenced by past experiences. So like just to kind of think about it, we have people who are in relationships who we say they have baggage. So what is baggage? Baggage is past experiences that you project on the present world. So if I have a history of being, let's say I was deeply, deeply in love and my partner cheated on me. And so this creates a trauma, a psychological trauma. My amygdala and my limbic system react. That alters my hippocampus. These memories change. My amygdala becomes hypersensitive. So I become very sensitive to stimuli of potentially getting hurt again. And now what's happened is the organism has learned. So now when I look at a new human being, I'm taking this past experience, which has changed my wiring. And now I'm looking at the world not in the way that it is. Now the world has become distorted. Because this person, I don't know if this person is going to cheat or not, but some part of my brain tells me this person is going to cheat. You can't trust them. So if we look at life, this is all life is. We are unfettered experience when we are children. There's nothing to add. We have no colorings. We have no biases. We have nothing like that. And then as we go through life, we accumulate all kinds of shit. Can I say that?
Sure.
Okay. So, and then if we sort of think about let's talk about mindset, right? Like an incel, whatever. So if you look at the incel mindset, where does it come from? It comes from their emotional baggage. It comes from all of the learnings that they have about reality. But the whole point is if you really look at an incel, they're divorced from reality. There's a study that just came out that showed that incels are very poor judges of what women actually want. They're very confident in the idea that women want A, B, and C. But if you actually look at women, that's not what they want. So if we look at life, if you really look at it, life is a particular way that is completely static. Like, this is water, this is a cup, this is not a good cup or a bad cup, this is not good water or bad water, it's just water. And the basic problem that we have with life is that we are unable to see life as it is. And the reason we're unable to see life as it is because we're colored by all of these past experiences. And so the process of that spiritual path or whatever is simply to see things as they are without the crap that we attach to it. And as you do this work on mindset, right? So like, if you kind of think about it, what holds people back? It is their false beliefs. If the beliefs were real, then changing them wouldn't cause any change. Does that kind of make sense?
I think I know what you mean.
Right? So if I believe this is hot water, but it's not, the only way that changing a belief works is that if a belief is false. Like, if you're accurate about something, you can change your beliefs as much as you want to. I can believe that I can fly, but if I can't fly and I jump off a building, I'm going to fall. So if you really look at it, what a lot of this spiritual path is to understand the universe and yourself as you truly are, instead of all of this baggage that you carry. Because this is the big problem, is if you look at your life, do the lessons that you learn, do you learn them with intention or are they automatic? This is the big problem, is it's all automatic. A child who grows up in a traumatic household believes that they are worthless. They don't get to choose this belief. It's not crafted. It's not crafted intentionally. It's not even crafted correctly, right? That's why we can change that false belief. But the majority of learning that we have in life, the majority of things that you've learned, the majority of things that I've learned haven't been learned carefully. They've been learned automatically by this biological system. And so the path is to undo all of that wiring and return as close as you can to pure, unfettered experience. Does that make sense?
It does. In the last sentence, it made me wonder if we are 100% on the same page or if we have a slight disagreement. So it is really, really intriguing to me when people so I think as we go, we're going to realize you are not a materialist. Maybe it doesn't matter right now. Anyway, I see you as thinking of the world slightly different than me, but you and I have come to the exact same conclusion, just with different words. So the words I use are frame of reference. We all have a frame of reference, and that enlightenment would be, if I had a conception of that, it would be your ability to completely step outside of your frame of reference and see things as close to reality as possible. So it sounds like on that we are aligned. So I see frame of reference as a distorted pair of lenses that you wear from the moment you are born to the moment you die. The crazy thing about them is, though, you can shape the distortion and will shape the distortion, but to your point, it's all unconscious most of the time. If you can take control of that, which I think is going to be our punchline to people, you have to become aware, and then you have to shape that lens. So the only difference, I think, is you think people will actually be able to access a place that is true. Would you call it true feeling? True. It was like true perception, but that wasn't the word you used. Do you remember the word you
this
used?
is what's great, is that no word can describe it.
Mm-hmm.
So the true state, so there's a state of consciousness called turiya, which is a transcendent state of consciousness. So it is a state that is beyond mind. And that state of consciousness is described.
Will you let me, is it a state beyond the distortions of the mind?
Beyond mind entirely.
What does that mean?
Great question. So let's talk about science for a second.
Yeah.
So if you look at mental illness, or just illness in general, right? So let's talk about medicine. So the whole idea in medicine is that there is a pathology. So pathology is there's some part of your body or mind that is malfunctioning, okay? So we can say that, let's say I have an autoimmune disease. So this is a case where my immune system is not functioning the way that it's supposed to. So that's why we call it an illness. In the case of mental illness, we have things like major depressive disorder, we have bipolar disorder, we have generalized anxiety disorder, we have schizophrenia, we have narcissistic personality disorder, we have all these different disorders. And the whole idea is that in our mind, there are lots of different things that can go wrong. Our sense of identity can go wrong. This can result in narcissism. Our ability to regulate our affect or mood can go wrong. This can result in bipolar disorder or a mood disorder. Our ability to, everyone's mind has the ability to look into the future and anticipate problems. When we lose control of that function, this is when we have anxiety. So we're seeing problems everywhere, and no matter how much we think about it, we're anxious, we're anxious, we're anxious. So these are all differences, different pathologies in the mind, right? This is what medicine says. So then comes meditation. Now, meditation is really interesting because generally speaking in medicine, we don't have one treatment for all things. If you have high blood pressure, we're going to correct your blood pressure. We're not going to give you an antibiotic. If you have an infection, we're not going to give you chemotherapy. We're going to give you an antibiotic. And in the same way, when it comes to the treatment of the mind, we have a lot of different medications. We have different psychedelics now, ketamine, whatever. We have different kinds of psychotherapy. We have evidence-based support that certain psychotherapies are effective for certain malfunctions of the mind. So mentalization-based therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy is very good for people with borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very effective for people who have mood disorders. We have all kinds of different stuff. Now, so then the question becomes, okay, if we have different problems, right? So if I have a car that has a flat tire, an oil change isn't going to fix it, right? So now the question becomes, how can it be that meditation is an evidence-based treatment for all mental illnesses? How is that possible? And the answer is that it transcends mind. It moves so far. The whole point of meditation is we move beyond mind entirely. So you can have any kind of problem in the mind and it won't matter because we're stepping outside of it. It's like you can have any kind of problem in your car. You can have a flat tire. You can have an engine that's broken. But if you take a helicopter, none of the problems of the car affect you. So this was something that is very, very important to understand, is that if we transcend mind entirely, all of these problems in the mind will get fixed. And this is what confused me so much. So when I was, studying to become a psychiatrist, I looked at all these yogic texts, and I had, piles of them from 7 years of studying in India and South Korea and Japan. And I looked at it and I was like, where is all the mental illness stuff? They have all these yogic texts where they go into so much detail about the way that the mind works, but they never talk about depression. They never talk about anxiety. And that's when I realized, oh, that's because they transcend mind entirely. They just move completely beyond the phenomenon of mind. And if you can do that, whatever problem exists within the mind becomes completely irrelevant because you've just bypassed the whole phenomenon. Does that make sense?
I understand the argument you are putting forth, but I would like to differentiate between agreement and understanding.
Yeah, great.
So yes, I understand.
So you had a question about, because I think you had asked me something about consciousness or mind.
Yeah.
Right?
So I'm going to restate your position.
Yeah.
If you agree that I understand your position, then I'm going to say it in my own words to find out whether I agree or not. Your position is that through meditation, we are able to transcend the mind. The mind is different than the brain. The mind is the sequence of, you won't like that. The mind is the lens of confusion that people are trapped behind that makes them be wrapped up and not understand their divinity.
Yes and no. So the mind the mind is not the problem. It is just one part of us. Right? So when we misidentify fully with the mind, that's the problem. So the mind is an instrument, just like my hand.
When we misidentify with the mind, I'm so sorry. My audience hates when I interrupt, but I have to understand.
No. So it's this idea that we believe we are our mind, but we're not our mind.
Can you use I? The we, if I ask who's the we, that'll work just fine. Okay, who's the we? What do you mean? When we...
So are you your mind?
Yes.
Does the mind have a physical form?
Yes.
What is the physical form of the mind?
The brain. It's way complicated. The brain, the heart,
Are you your hand?
Yeah. You could cut off my hand and I would probably experience life with very little difference. But if you transplant somebody's heart, the recipient will make noises about like, hey, I feel like I'm adopting the person's personality. Way undiscovered, super big question marks. But I have a feeling that just like if you give somebody's microbiome to somebody else, it impacts them. So I don't think it's as simple as just the brain, but I don't believe there is anything that does not, that isn't a hologram created by biology. So the sense of self is a hologram created by biology. That is my thesis.
Okay, so fair enough. So then let's understand something. So I think it depends on definitions, right? So you're defining, so if you define the mind as anything you are capable of experiencing, right? So all experiences are born out of the mind.
All experiences are understood in the mind.
So you cannot have an experience outside of mind.
That is correct.
So I don't know
Which the way I would have said it, though nothing was wrong with that, is that you cannot have any experience that exists outside of the brain. That's more grounded in what I mean. When people hear me say that, they're going to be probably more mad because I think some people believe there's something beyond the brain. I really do not.
So I think that this is it's a really fascinating, and it just depends on whether you want to go here or not.
I want to go here so badly.
Okay.
It's one of the things I was most excited to talk to you about.
So I think I used to agree with you, and even now I agree with you. So like I understand the neuroscience of it.
Yep.
I think the key thing is that as we have some transcendent experiences, so like you can have experiences that will shape your understanding of reality.
Question.
Yeah.
Does transcendent mean where I have broken past my mind?
I would say yes.
Okay.
But let's understand that we can biologically induce some level of transcendent experience.
Through drugs?
Yes. Or not just drugs, through meditation, right? So
Okay.
so we can do things like we know that, for example, like I said, temporoparietal junction, you can electrically stimulate the temporoparietal junction and you can have an out-of-body experience. So this is where things get kind of tricky because there's a different way of kind of looking at things, which is not that life is all reduced to biology, but that biology is one layer of existence. So it's just a different way of looking at things. So if you look at something like a family, okay? So a family is not something that is a physical object, right? It is like a conception or an abstract thing. So now the question kind of becomes, okay, if we think that this family is not a real thing, but it still has utility. So like this almost gets into philosophy, which is not actually what I'm interested in because I'm kind of focused on individual experience and growth and stuff like that. So it's really about practical applicability. But if you kind of get to like, what is the nature of a human being? There's this kind of going back to the original point of how do we get there, right? So how does a human become enlightened? So you go through a series of practices to peel away prior layers of mind, because if you kind of think about what is your mind, so you can say that it's consciousness too, but the yogis would separate out what you call mind into two pieces. And they would say that mind is what thinks, it's what has emotions, it's what has memories, but your fundamental subjective experience of you, they define that as outside of mind. Now, this is also where things get really weird because you can make a biological reductionist argument that we have no physical evidence for subjective experience outside of the brain, which is fair enough, but that presumes that there are no layers of existence that are not physical. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. So one, I want to give people a mile marker. Everybody stick with us. I'm telling you this, I would have cut this off a long time ago or cut this out of the episode. If you're hearing this, it's because it's actually going somewhere. And the place that it is going that I really want to make sure people understand, you and I use different words for this. If this all started from something has happened in culture, society, whatever, that is derailing men, washing them out to a cold, dark sea, as I said at the beginning of this. If you do not understand that using your words, you're trapped in the mind. Using my words, you're trapped in a frame of reference. If you do not understand the distortions that you're living inside of, you will never find your way out. Okay, now what we're debating about is, or maybe even just coming to understand, because I'm so fascinated by what you're talking about, that there are ways to understand the mind that may make it easier to get out of the trap. And I think what you and I are going to present are the ways that we have over our lives come to understand, see if you like this analogy, that we've both come to understand, and this is, I think, maybe a more Buddhist way of saying it, the difference between the sky and the clouds that cross the sky.
Very well said, right?
Perfect. So we're both trying to describe the same phenomena, but we use slightly different words.
Yeah, I don't think, honestly, I know it's kind of weird, but I don't think it matters whether everything is biological reductionism or not, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is the practical element of it, right? So you can make an argument that everything that you know about biology, how do you know everything that you know about biology? It's all perceived through your consciousness, right? All knowledge that you have about biology, at the root of it, if you weren't conscious, you wouldn't know any of it. Does that make sense?
It does, but I have such a strong conviction, loosely held, so please, if you can shake me of it. Biology is all that matters. And that this moment, if you force me to define it in a single sentence, I would say people have stopped believing that you're having a biological experience. Now, I said that long before the gender thing came along. That wasn't even on my radar. I was just trying to get people to understand why they suffer.
Yeah, so I think this is where just I have some experiences which have caused me to consider the view that is not biologically reductionist. So the simplest of which is like, these are patient experiences. So I once had a patient who was in a really bad accident, was in a coma, was in the neuro ICU. So we get consulted. I'm a psychiatrist. And so we get consulted because the neurologists are concerned that this patient has depression. So I go in and I assess them for depression. The prognosis is good. They're going to make a full recovery. They have a family. A guy has a wife who loves him, 2 kids that love him. He's going to be fine. He's financially okay. Everything's okay. Everything's great. So I go in, I see him, I assess him for depression. It turns out that he's not, doesn't seem depressed. He doesn't check the boxes of our understanding of depression. So then I kind of tell him, right, I said the team is a little bit concerned. Is it okay if I just come by and check on you again because you seem like everything's fine? So I come and I visit the guy maybe every other day for a period of about a week. And then, one day I get to know him. And then sort of he tells me that while he was in a coma, right, and this goes back to your matrix thing, while he was in a coma, the reason he's depressed today is because he had a whole other life. That he was married to a different group of people and he fell in love and he had a different set of kids. And the reason he's depressed now is because he realizes that that life is false. Now, this gets to this idea of, are we all living in the matrix or whatever? I don't know how to answer that. And frankly, I don't care, right? So the main thing is that I don't know that you can convince someone using intellect or logic that one way is correct and one way isn't. So you can have your firmly held beliefs, which is totally fine. I have my firmly held beliefs, which are based on my experiences. And we can also agree to disagree. That's okay. The main thing, though, is that I think whether you consider it biology or you consider it some kind of transcendent consciousness, what we certainly know, and there is overwhelming scientific evidence for, is that the people who conceptualized existence as something beyond biology developed a set of practices based on that theory. And those practices have evidence-based outcomes that are positive for just about all human beings. And we even know the biological layer, I would use the word layer, it's just that there's other layers of existence, that's all. So even if you sort of think about thought, are thoughts real or not, they're certainly not material. You can say that they arise out of biology, that's totally fine. And this is kind of where you can also look at like matter versus energy, right? So like if I look at a wave and I examine the thing using a physical element, I'm not talking about like a force measure, but let's say all I can measure is matter. So if I scoop out water, I will never find a wave. So I personally think that we're just at that point in science where we just haven't been able to detect consciousness using physical instrumentation because our instrumentation isn't good enough. So you can't use matter to detect energy, I think. Maybe you can, I don't know. But we have ways of detecting energy, and we just haven't developed our science in that realm yet. Kind of coming back to the point, though, is that what we sort of know is that there is a process which these yogis say will lead you to enlightenment. And I was a biological reductionist too, and then I started doing advanced sadhana. So this is a spiritual practice. These are the esoteric spiritual practices you learn from people in the Himalayas. And your experience of existence is so wildly different from the day-to-day experience of existence, having memories of things like past lives or whatever, there's all kinds of different stuff, that then you can still say, okay, this is all just hallucinations in the brain, and that's a completely fair argument. There's no scientific way to disprove that. The point, though, is that whether you want to disprove it or not, I don't know, but I don't know if this kind of makes sense. It sort of doesn't matter, because even when we look at the path of changing someone's frame of reference or doing psychotherapy, we're not working on biology directly. We're using the layer of mind to do the work. Does that kind of make sense? When I talk to you, I'm working on the layer of your mind as a psychotherapist. And you can say that the mind is real or is a hallucination. It doesn't matter. It still has a biological cascade, which is going to alter your neurons, alter your amygdala hypersensitivity. We know that meditation strengthens the connections between your frontal lobe and your amygdala. So frankly, I think it's sort of a philosophical argument about, is it just the brain? Because I'll completely acknowledge that there is a biological layer. I just happen to think that there's another layer, which I consider real, which biological reductionists will consider essentially a hallucination. But it doesn't matter, because the methodologies still work, and we have scientific proof of that.
Yeah, that I think we agree on. Okay, so for everybody keeping up with the mile markers, here would be the next one. You are living inside of a delusion, whether you think of that as the mind with its trappings, or you think of that as a frame of reference with its trappings. No human being, in fact, every human life is going to be defined by your ability to see through the distortion to something with predictive ability. And so while you and I use very different words, as I was listening to you, it really feels like we are very much describing the same thing. And again, gentlemen, we're trying to help you get to a better place. So to get to that better place, you have to identify the distortions. We know that they are born of what you call the mind, what I call frame of reference, which I'm perfectly happy to use mind, certainly as I view it. Whether we're unlocking higher states of consciousness that are no longer tied to biology, we both agree. It doesn't really matter. We're just trying to get to your mind works a certain way, creates distortions that can be somewhat predictable if you look at your traumas and your beliefs and your value system and just what your own personality is like. You can begin to really zero in on these. And that if you begin to pull certain levers, you can change the distortions to either transcend, or to, the way I think about it is, as I mentioned earlier, I see your frame of reference as a distorted lens that can be rewarped. It will never be 100% accurate. I don't think the human mind has the processing power to see the world as it actually is, which would be a set of photons reflecting off you at certain wavelengths and certain amounts, right? That's what I'm actually seeing. I don't perceive that. I perceive it as you wearing a gray shirt, right? So it's a hyper simplified version of the world. So now that we know that both of us are talking about a game of self-awareness, growing to understand the distortions that are causing you to behave in ways that don't lead you to your intended goal, which is why I'm obsessed with thinking about not enlightenment, but thinking about utility. You have a goal. Is this behavior going to move you to that goal? Yes or no? If it is, then do it. And if it's not, don't do it. Now, I will say, be wise, have honorable goals, but that's really, as the materialist in the room, that's like the really straight line. We're both trying to get people to a better place. Yes?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So those are the mile markers through. I love that.
Okay.
But for anybody that needs those mile markers to hold on to, there they are. Okay. So now let's come crashing back to earth. If you had to define what a life worth living is made of, what elements would you say apply?
What a great, I love these questions because they're so hard to answer. So the short answer is that I think, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but I think basically a life of neutrality and nothing is the closest thing to a life worth living. So a life with no goals, where you just exist in the present, you focus on action, life is just meant to be lived. So a life doesn't have any attributes. You're just living the life itself. You're being here on. So right now, I consider this to be a life worth living. I am ecstatic that we are doing this right now. Could this help 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people? Maybe, but that's not what this is about. This is a moment between you and me where I should be here, and I'm loving this conversation. Here I am in Los Angeles, California, where you are and all this kind of stuff, right? Like, so this is a beautiful moment in existence, which is only going to exist now. We may never even see each other again. So to appreciate what this is right now is the essence of it. Now, You can't get there, though, very easily. So very practically, I think that, there's a saying that you can't meditate on an empty stomach. And to achieve this state of mind, I think you have to go through some steps. So at first, I was unhappy because I had not achieved something in life. But to truly transcend achievement, you can't give up achievement without achieving, just like my teacher said. So I had a very negative ego where I was like, I'm a loser, I'm nothing, which I had a lot of evidence for. And then I had a very big ego where I was a spiritual person, I was at Harvard, I was doing this, I was doing that. And then I still had that ego, but then I let that go too. And then I realized that you kind of have to go through the steps. And so I think that, like, by all means, become successful, but then what you'll find is that success is not enough, right? Let's talk about you for a second. You built a very successful business, you exited it, and then were you content for the rest of your life?
Not even close.
Not even close. Well, what the fuck, man? I thought that like 99% of the people out there are trying to do exactly what you already did. Are you telling me that that's not going to lead them to everlasting happiness?
I am telling you that aggressively.
Exactly. So first you don't have achievement, and then you attain achievement. And then you realize that attaining achievement isn't going to be enough. Then you can truly transcend the phenomenon of achievement. To be a loser and to be successful. Then you realize that I realize I'm the same person. I piss the same way I did. I shit the same way that I did. I still struggle in the same ways that I used to. That's life. I'm successful. I'm not successful. I'm the same piece of shit that I was back then. And I'm the same awesome guy that I am now. You're always you, right? And this is hard to understand. So I think that, like, in terms of building a life worth living, I think by all means have your goals, right? Like, adopt your frame set shift, achieve those kinds of goals. And I work with a lot of people who are high performers, billionaires, CEOs, whatever. But I also work with degenerate gamers, people who are in jail, people who are homeless, right? And all their struggles are very similar. I think what makes us human is much more shared than it is different. I've seen people who are homeless who are suicidal, and I've seen people who are multimillionaires who are suicidal. And so by all means, chase all your goals and achieve them, but achieve them with awareness. Don't get so caught up in them. And also try something else, right? So if you've been chasing goals your whole life and it's not bringing you happiness, pause and think for a second. Can you just enjoy a simple day? When you say, what is a life worth living? I would ask that to all of your listeners. Take the best days in your life and look at what are you doing that day. What is a moment worth living? What is your favorite moment? Is it winning a video game? What is the price that you pay for that? So just look at yourself, because you can't build a life worth living. All you can do is live a moment worth living. And then theoretically, if you add those on, you'll have a life worth living. But even I don't agree with that. I imagine you will, but that's okay.
Yes. I do believe in having some scaffolding. I think that there is a formula for a life worth living, which I always call fulfillment. The reason that I think that's the right place to go, if you remember, my North Star is human flourishing. The only mental state that is positive, that can survive even grief, is fulfillment. So then the question becomes, okay, what is fulfillment? Because ultimately fulfillment is just a neurological state, which I'm sure if I knew the cocktail, I could induce it chemically. But to induce it naturally—
Heroin in your veins.
I don't know. I've never done heroin, so I can't say, but maybe. But the things that you would need to do are, you have to work really hard to gain a set of skills that matter to you for whatever reason, that allow you to progress and get better in serving not only yourself, but other people. If you do all of that, I think the algorithms that are running in your mind that were put there by evolution, you will just feel a deep sense of profound well-being. Now, there are a lot of traps and there's a lot of distortions that most people fall to as they try to do that. The number one is thinking that, oh, I'm going to help this many people and I'll feel good about myself. I'm going to get this award and I'm going to feel good about myself. I'm going to get so good at this thing that I make a lot of money and I'm going to feel good about myself. All of which are distortions, traps. They are not going to get you anywhere. But, and I'll be very curious. So in fact, one thing, I feel like I've said this behind your back, even though I never had you in mind when I said it, but I've always said that I keep in my back pocket Buddhist style detachment. I've never been a monk, but dude, early in my life, from the time I was like 15 or 16, I called myself a Taoist. Like that was my thing. Like I was about it. I was like an inch short of getting a minor in Eastern philosophy in college. Just really, really captivated by a very orthogonal way of thinking to how I had grown up. And reading the Tao Te Ching, I felt like, yo, this was written by Yoda from Star Wars. Like, this is the greatest shit ever. Like, obviously, George Lucas basically just stole from Taoism and Buddhism and the way that Yoda presented his philosophies, but they always struck me as so profoundly useful. So in going through all of that, I came to a tourist's understanding of what detachment would look like. And that always felt like the wrong path for me because I wanted to do the other side of that coin, which was to engage as deeply as humanly possible without worrying at all about the outcome. And so
that is detachment. That's not the tourist version. That's the real version.
Interesting. So a monk, which is my sort of visualization of what I was calling real detachment, is they're not eating that bag of chips. They are not striving to be the greatest of all time. They're just trying to be here in the present moment, to remember the beauty of a pebble. That's not how I'm trying to live my life.
How are you trying to live your life?
I am trying to make sure that I achieve fulfillment. So working really hard to gain a set of skills that allow me to progress in doing cool things for myself and serving others. I would say I achieve that probably 40% of the time. I feel like I'm on a good path. Like there's a Greek phrase for it. Yeah, please.
Are you fulfilled with your lack of fulfillment because you're moving in the right direction?
Am I fulfilled with my lack of fulfillment? Whenever I feel unfulfilled, I take that as a nudge that I have gone off course. Do you play Minecraft?
Mm-mm.
Oh man. What? Anyway, I am an evangelist for Minecraft. There's a very interesting thing in Minecraft. You can put torches up, it creates a safe area. You can sometimes think you're setting torches up as like, oh, follow this path. But then it gets dark and you can sort of tell the direction of the light. And so what you realize is, oh, it's getting dark. That's a reminder to get back into the light. It's getting dark, reminder to get back into the light. That's how I feel when I'm not fulfilled. It's like, that's a reminder to come back into the light. Because I really feel there is a lighted path. And that lighted path is that thing that I just listed for fulfillment. And so you can become obsessed with an outcome, you've fallen off the path. You can stop thinking about others, you've fallen off the path, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I don't think, Tom, you have a tourist's understanding of Taoism. I think you have an authentic understanding of it. So let's understand a couple things, okay? So what I realized, the reason I didn't become a monk is because I realized that the trappings of a monk and being a monk are two entirely different things. So if I had a teacher who had accepted me, I would have never been a monk because I would have still had all these internal problems, these attachments, this ego, this pride of humility, which you see a lot in the spiritual world. Look at me, how little ego I have. Look at me, I'm so spiritual, I'm not materialistic at all, right? I don't wear Lululemon, I wear simple things. Look at me. So this is very, very common. So if we really look at it, what I realize is that the detachment is internal. It's not, so you can be in the world, you can get married, you can have kids, whatever. So even when we sort of say that, like, okay, I have kids and I love my kids and I will be hurt and all this kind of stuff. So I was struggling a lot when I was deciding to have kids where like, is this mean I'm screwed because I'm bound to this world? And then I detached from attachment in general. I said, let my life be attached. Let me suffer. What's going to happen is going to happen. Like if I get fucked, I get fucked, and that's okay. I've chosen to live my life this way, and so be it. I choose this, right? And so it's weird, but like it's really great because I'm detached from everything, even though I'm attached. I'm detached to the concept. I'm not hung up on being detached, which is what I used to be. So if you sort of look at even your sense of fulfillment, I think you're very fulfilled. And I think you have a emotional variance. But what I detect in you is that even transcending that, if you're moving in the right direction, you can maybe not quite forgive yourself 100%, because if you would do that, you wouldn't have accomplished everything you've accomplished. So there's a karmic element here too to your life where you have certain debts that you need to be paid, and you've said to yourself, this is who I am, and you're moving towards it. But I mean, you didn't need to tell me that you had kept Taoism in your back pocket since you were 15. That's your karma too. You've always had this voice. You know this stuff. You've known it for a very long time, and you can live and you can become successful and you can make a big impact or a less big impact, and you're going to be okay. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but like, it's not like achieving a particular thing is going to do it, because you even say that, right? You say that you can slip into this idea of, if I'm trying to go for this goal, then like it's going to disturb it. Right? So if you really look at it, the one thing that I would say for you and everyone else out there is like, look at the nature of your fulfillment. What does it mean to be fulfilled? And sure, there's some biological cocktail of oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, whatever you want. All that layering is there. And then the real question for you is, can you be okay with being unfulfilled? Because if you can achieve that, then you'll have transcended the whole thing.
I'm definitely hung up on that one. It just feels wise to me. It's interesting. I'll have to reflect on that. But as of right now, with my distorted lens, it feels wise to pursue fulfillment.
See, that answer, you can't, you're right. You're more right? Because of the caveats that you add. For in this moment, it feels right to me. So it is right for you. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but do you realize how different that answer is? Because there's a part of you that understands that this is just in this moment that I am this way. So you're accepting yourself as being attached. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
And so the acceptance of attachment is detachment. It's when we are ignorant of our attachments that we really get into problems, right? So when I'm super hung up on a girl, the moment I realize, holy shit, I'm hung up on this way too much, that's the source of my peace. It's not actually being hung up or not being hung up. It is our ignorance of being hung up. When we deny to ourselves that I'm in love with this person, but I shouldn't be in love with them, right? That's when we get really screwed up. So even accepting the flaws within yourself, and this is where we get to the, the garden variety Buddhism of acceptance. You're doing it. And you're saying that I'm not doing it because you're looking at other people who are sitting in ashrams or monasteries. That's real. That's not real detachment. You're real detachment. You're already doing it. Just look at what you're doing, and you'll find that there's a lot of contentment. And even you'll find that lack of fulfillment is like just one slice of you. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. You just made a penny drop for me. So given that this year is an election year, I am super freaked out for the first time in my life, maybe just because I never paid attention before, or maybe because this time really is different. But the idea that people are not aware of their attachment to the tribe, that's the thing that worries me. So the drum I have been beating forever is you have to want dynamic tension between, say, the left and the right. But is it more fruitful to get them to focus on their attachment? I don't know if I could do it in the way that you can, but as you look at what we're stepping into, where we're going to be back Biden, Trump, almost certainly on the ticket, what is your thinking? What is the problem? Attachment to tribe? Is the problem something else? How do we diffuse the situation?
I think the biggest problem that we see in our political climate today is a lack of compassion for the other side. So speaking of Jordan Peterson, who you quoted earlier, I thought there was one thing that I really liked that he said, and I'm not going to get into him, but I think his lectures are fantastic. So he has a couple of lectures from University of Toronto that are on YouTube that are phenomenal, especially ones on personality. So I'm not espousing his political beliefs or even commenting on those. But one thing that I really liked is after Trump won the election, I think he was a guest on Bill Maher's show or something like that. And then I think Bill Maher's liberal, is that right?
Yes.
And so they were talking about all these Trump supporters are idiots, all these Trump supporters are idiots. And I'm not commenting on whether that's true or not. But then I liked Peterson's response, and he said, so what's your plan with them? Right? Because like, whether you think they're idiots or not, they're here and they voted this guy into power. What are you going to do about them? So this is one of the biggest problems that I see with Israel, Palestine, left versus right. No one is trying to understand what the other person is thinking. And so the one thing that I have found as a psychiatrist is that like, Everyone's like, I'm right and they're wrong. And everyone has data. And I mean, this is the crazy thing, right? You can ask someone on the right, are you objectively right? They'll say yes. You ask someone on the left, are you objectively right? They'll say yes. And they completely disagree. And if you really look at it, I think the basic problem is that no one is trying to understand, because everyone thinks that the other side is idiots.
Yeah.
But if you really stop and think about it, if you think someone is a complete idiot, their understanding of the world has to be very different from yours to be that stupid. So their experience is so different. And I think the basic problem is that we're not unified anymore. Like no one is trying to work together, right? Everyone is just decrying the other side. The other side is idiots. They're stupid. They're woke, whatever. Like to pick whatever your insult there is. But the one thing I've learned as a psychiatrist is even people who have low IQ are not stupid. They're just living their life and they're living the best way that they know how. And they have these kinds of experiences. I'm from Texas. And I was in Boston. So surrounded by liberals over there, but my family is in Texas and tons of conservatives. And I hear both sides and I listen to both of them. And I think everyone has a very understandable perspective. I think some of them are wrong from an objective standpoint. But even then, do you blame the person who is wrong? I know it sounds kind of weird because we usually do, but this is where I'll kind of say, so I worked with a kid who was an adolescent who was smearing shit on bathroom walls.
Fun.
Right? And so they go to like juvenile detention or whatever, they get into trouble. But like everyone is willing to punish and say that this kid is bad and say that this kid is awful. No one ever stops to ask, why are you doing this? What's going on in your life? Of course it's abuse at home, right? The kid doesn't know any other way to do things. And you can look at something, you can say, that's objectively bad, but how do we treat this child? Because punishing him doesn't work. So the biggest thing that scares me, and I think that if we look at what's going wrong in the world today, is we have stopped even attempting to understand what someone who strongly disagrees with us. And like both sides are guilty of that. No one gives a shit what the other side thinks or why. We just say that you're wrong and they need to be stopped at all costs. And if you really look at it, like, the way to overcome addiction or the way to work things out in marriage counseling is each side has to understand the other side's perspective. And right now we have no empathy. And so if we have no empathy, we have no understanding of the other person. It becomes antagonistic. And then of course, what are people going to do when they're backed into a corner? They're going to fight. The way to stop all this political stuff, the way to fix gender dynamics, and we did this on our subreddit, which was an absolute mess. There's a place where echo chambers collided. Women from some corner of the internet and incels from some corner of the internet met on our subreddit, and boy, was it a mess. Our mods are amazing. And we were able to navigate through that. There was this beautiful post where a woman said, I'm a conventionally attractive woman who can get laid whenever I want to, and I'm incredibly lonely. Here's my story. And when people who like post incel stuff are like, wow, I never realized that your life could be like this. I see myself in you. I thought you were completely different. I'm so sorry that your life has been this way. Like it's through compassion and understanding of the opposite side. That's our only salvation. And the other option is, of course, that you could eliminate the other side, which has happened in violence in history, right?
But that's been the go-to choice for millennia.
Yeah.
Is there even the remote possibility of empathy in the age of algorithms?
Yes. I think algorithms, it's a beautiful question because I think algorithms make it harder, exponentially harder, right? So I think what people have realized is that activating your emotional circuitry is what gets you to stay on a particular website. And the problem right now is that there's an arms race between platforms. The problem is that whichever platform wins, the individual loses. So take your platform, they're all competing with each other for your attention, but the one person who always loses your attention is you. So I think a lot of people don't realize that what keeps them on a platform is often things like righteous fury. So I think this is the strongest emotion that keeps people engaged. And I think that there is opportunity. So I think we can use these tools. That's what we do when we interview people and stuff like that. We try to create a space where that is emotionally engaging, but hopefully helps people become empathic. But we're definitely losing and the deck is stacked against us. But I think it's possible. I don't think we've lost.
Do you have to set the phone down and just disengage from the algorithm? Can you take control of the algorithm? What do you
So I think people who can just set the phone down don't have the problem.
Mm.
So I think that it's a slow process of, first of all, like understanding what you get from this. I think there are all kinds of like neuroscience tips that people don't really know. That's not like common knowledge. So like one good example of this is that, so you can think about the dopamine in your brain like a lemon. So when you wake up in the morning, your brain is full of dopamine. So if you do a non-dopaminergic activity and a lemon is full, you don't have to squeeze very hard like a boring activity, and you'll still get some juice. You'll get some reward. But if you play something like a video game, it's like a strong squeeze. And so at the very beginning, you'll get a lot of pleasure, but even after you've squeezed most of the juice out of the lemon, you can still keep squeezing with porn and video games and things like that. Right? And then you can extract a little bit. Yeah.
You start by playing video games and you end up jelking in your goon cave with 8 screens of pornography.
Yeah, exactly.
This is good. These are good
right?
tips.
So
I hope you're taking notes, everybody.
There's your hydraulic press.
Nice.
Right?
Yes.
So that's
do it
what
at the end of the day when you need that harder squeeze.
So something as simple as if you play video games for even an hour in the morning, all other tasks will be difficult for you for the rest of the day. You will get literally more of an experience of reward and reinforcement if you do something first thing when you wake up. So there are all kinds of tools at our disposal that we can learn these kinds of tools so we understand how we work. But the basic problem here is that all of those technologies are manipulating you. And in order for you to combat them, you have to understand yourself. That's the only way that it works, because they're not going to be looking out for you.
Yeah, I was very much hoping you were going to say that. This feels to me like a very useful extension to the idea. Earlier, I looked at my desires and I saw from every angle that this was not going anywhere interesting. I agree with you violently that what we have to do is find a way to come together. Ray Dalio puts the odds at us being in a civil war, I think, in the next 10 years at 50%. So it's really terrifying. And so if people don't get that awareness, come to understand not only themselves, but the algorithms, and then my mission in life feels like to get people to understand you want the dynamic tension between the two sides. And if you think the other side is stupid, as you were saying, they all do, and you allow yourself to be manipulated and have that reinforced by the algorithm, then there is nowhere for this to go other than violence. And so even if you just want to look at a future that's optimistic for your children, you want to find that exit ramp. What is the way that we resolve this in a nonviolent fashion? And that is going to be, back to your point about Jordan Peterson, asking, hey, these people exist. And so standing around saying that they're stupid, regardless of what side you're on, saying the other side is stupid, they're here. So what exactly are we going to do to build bridges? That becomes the question.
Yeah, and I think that's what we see with kind of wrapping things back around to gender dynamics. So I think like that's the problem, right? Is if we look at all this toxic masculinity, what do we do with people who are toxically masculine? We blame them, right? We hold them responsible. We don't look at what was the world that formed them in that way. And so this is why toxic masculinity is actually on the rise, is because there's only one group of people, because they get ostracized from all other corners of the internet. What ends up happening? They end up into the waiting arms of the people who are toxically masculine. And then we wonder why these people keep, my friend, my boyfriend, my son is going down the toxic rabbit hole of masculinity. What can I do to stop it? What you can do to stop it is listen to what they fucking say about their life instead of invalidating them. Understand that they have nowhere else to go, that they're kicked out of everywhere, that you're making a post about how to stop this because this person is going down the wrong road without trying to actually listen to what that person says and trying to help them. And this is where people will say, but I've tried to help them. How? You told them to do things differently. That's what it is 99% of the time. You didn't actually listen to what their experience of things were. When someone says, I have trouble, how did you respond? Did you say, help me understand how you have trouble? Did you say, what can I do to help? Or did you say, hey, you need to stop doing that because it's bad? And a lot of human beings think that they're very compassionate, but oftentimes, especially when it's gender dynamics, we get triggered so hard, our own emotional circuitry becomes so hyperactive that we see in black and white, we get paranoid, all this kind of stuff happens. You have to shut down all that circuitry to be able to see things calmly.
Yeah, frame of reference. You are in a wildly distorted frame of reference, and unless you can calm your emotions down, you're never going to be able to see outside of that. Going back to the concept that, hey, look, it might not be your fault that things are this way, but it is your responsibility to do something about it. In all of this, I fear that what people hear is they envision themselves on the side that's being unfairly persecuted. I would say it is far wiser to look at the situation and say, oh, what can I do to build a bridge? Not how do I finally get heard that I'm being hard done by, and instead really start looking at, okay, how do I be the one that bridges that gap?
Yeah, and I think it reminds me of trauma groups, where when you have group therapy with people who have trauma, you can get this one-upmanship going on, where one person says, I was traumatized in this way, and someone says, I had it worse. And so I think the basic problem, this is a very, very scary thing that's happened in our society, is we say like, okay, like, I have it bad, therefore I can't listen to them. So I know this sounds crazy, but the moment that human beings start to say, I don't need to be heard, it's okay for me to not get my needs met, and I'm willing to still support someone else, that's the moment things will turn around. But everyone feels like I need to get my needs met first, then I can go help someone else. Whereas I think we'd live in a very different world if you woke up tomorrow and said, I don't need to get my needs met. I'm one of the L's of the human race. I'm fucked in my life, and still I'm going to do what I can. I'm a sinking ship, but I'm going to try to save as many people as I can before I go down. And if we can start to do that, the world will change tomorrow.
Yeah, man, that's some biblical stuff right there. The idea of, yeah, you're going to be crucified. That is what it is. And now it becomes, how are you going to respond to that? I'm not a religious guy, but that idea really resonates with me in terms of, yes, there are going to be horrific things that will meet you. If nothing else, either I or my wife will have to watch the other one die. Oh God. Like, that is distressing. That is distressing, man. And I don't know which of those would be worse for me. I don't know if it'd be worse knowing I'm leaving her alone, or if it would be worse watching her die. Oh, Jesus. And so knowing that not only does that catastrophe come, but that all of us die, much to my dismay, though I'd love to see it change. We are currently on a path. Nobody gets out alive. And if in the face of that, you throw up your hands and embrace a nihilistic view, you've just made things worse. Versus if you say, okay, I get it. At the end of this, I'm still going to find some way to connect to something positive. I'm going to recognize that I am the sky and not the storm rolling across it.
Well said.
Yeah. Man, let me ask, dude, every now and then I look out at a future and all I see is the event horizon of technology, of global disruption. It gets hard to predict the future. I won't even necessarily say it's going to be bad. I just can't see what it is. How do you advise people, as somebody who's very cognizant of long-term plans are not your best friends anyway? How do we approach a world of just crippling uncertainty and live in a joyful manner?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So that's something I've seen more and more of. So in my clinical practice, the rise of existential depression is huge. So people like there something was different 40 years ago where like the future seemed like a relatively safe place and now it's uncertain. I've had a very high number of patients who the reason they choose not to have kids is because they cannot justify bringing a child into this uncertain world. So it's something I've seen a ton of. I think, I know it sounds kind of weird, but like you can only do as much as you can do. So it's kind of this philosophy of karma, and action and fruit. So it's not in your life to control what happens. It's only in your life to control what you choose to do. And so certainly it's not like random, right? So if you do the right things, it increases your probabilities. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I think that's really our only salvation, is to like focus on the present moment, because this is where we are right now. right? And you should think about the future, but this is where a lot of people trip up. See, thinking about the future should be something that you control. It should not control you. If we look at something like anxiety, you look at the future, you say, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. And then how does that thought affect you? Does it paralyze you? Does it make you too fearful? Can you just acknowledge that you don't know? No one knows what's going to happen, right? And so the fact that no one knows what's going to happen, it's a universal human condition. No one has ever known what's going to happen. It's been impossible. No human being has been able to see the future. And so despite all that, whether you can see the future or you can't see the future, the reality that you live in today is what you live in today. And 99.9% of people I've worked with know what they should do today. They may be in denial, but they know what they should do. So they'll say something like, it won't be enough. But if you really think about that, like, oh, like working out, going to the gym once won't be enough. Where is their mind? Their mind is in the future. They are projecting out that this won't be enough. How do you know? You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I think the only antidote, which is something that Buddha figured out thousands of years ago and studies on mindfulness are figuring out today, is focus on the present. It's all you can do. It's the only place you can exist. You can't exist in the future. You can't exist in the past. You literally exist here and now. Now is your time to act. And it is the false belief that you can act in the future that screws people up. Procrastination is what? I'll do it later. Later becomes now. It's going to be the same. Whether you do it now or whether you do it later, it's always now. You can only act in the present. You can't act in the future. By the time the future rolls around, it's the present again. So this fundamental misunderstanding that human beings forget about the future because it's always the present. The only thing that ever exists is the present. And so that's where your focus should be. And then to some degree, you will be able to learn. I mean, so I was so lucky because I had opportunities to learn this that most human beings don't get. That's being a doctor. So I can't save a life, right? So you may disagree, which is fair enough. But this is what I learned, right? So someone comes in with I remember the actual case, someone came in with 3 gunshot wounds into the emergency room, right? And here we are, Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the best hospitals on the planet. And like, we don't know, we can do everything we can do. And so then what I sort of found is that I did a lot of work on physician burnout. What tears physicians up is the physicians who think that they can save a life. What allows physicians to sleep at night is, did you do the best that you could? If you did the best that you could, then if you decondition your mind, then you'll be able to sleep, right? Because what more could you do? You did everything that you could, and take solace in that. And now this is a beautiful thing. You were talking about motivation, so now we're going to circle back to how to find the perfect motivation in your life. Once you realize that you can attain complete peace of mind by doing 100% effort, right? I can try to save this kid's life. He's been shot 3 times. And so I'm not God, but I'm going to do everything within my power. And there will be sadness if the person still dies, but you will be able to sleep at night. Now you have discovered something very beautiful, which is peace of mind comes through 100% effort. And then you will never procrastinate again. Because you know that all I have to do is put forth 100%. It's not about the outcome. It's, did I do everything that I could do? I'm guessing that for your viewers who are not happy with their lives, the reason they're not happy is because they know they can do better. No human being wakes up and thinks to themselves, oh my God, my life sucks because I can't fly. It's impossible. So it causes us no suffering. And what causes us suffering is when something is possible and we do not do it, when we know we're capable. So put forth 100% effort and recognize that you're just human. And you'll find peace of mind. And then once you realize this is the way to find peace of mind, then it becomes easy to put forth effort. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It makes a ton of sense. And I love that. It's very akin to Jocko Willink's idea of discipline equals freedom. It's the surprising thing of, if I give it my everything and I fail still, I'll be okay because I know I did everything I could, assuming they have the belief that you don't have absolute authority over the outcome. And I think that's right. I think that's exactly what you have to teach people is, like I always tell people, look, I am trying to build the next Disney. I'm really swinging for the fences. My odds of success are just ridiculously low. But I don't value myself for whether or not I accomplish it. I value myself for whether I sincerely pursue it every day. Meaning, do I go play and leave everything out on the field? If I give it my all and I fail, cool. I'll be fine with that. I won't be ecstatic that I didn't make it, but I will have I will be completely at ease with myself because I know I did everything that I could. That is the most freeing thing in my life, was when I stopped valuing myself for the outcome and I started valuing myself for the pursuit. That's when it got a lot more fun.
Well
All
said.
right, I want to go back to the idea of either being able to see or not being able to see the future, and exactly how we find the right amount of detachment. So I like, given the group of people that you speak to, they bring you like some hard realities about where the world is. And I think the world is in a financially super weird position. So boomers had it great. They locked up a ton of wealth. They came in at a time where you could just sort of blindly invest in an index fund, and over a long enough time, you were going to do very well. Housing was cheap. It was going to be the best investment of your life. On a relatively normal salary, you could get a 30-year mortgage and buy a house. I mean, just like all the things that could have been at their back. I mean, demographics is destiny, right? Everything just like really lined up for them. But you have somebody now who's in their early 20s, and they treat everything like it's gambling, because they don't see any way for them to get on that wealth track like their parents did. So they've got to YOLO. They've got to do the GameStop. They've got to do crypto. They've got to do something that could deliver just this massively disproportionate return. And so they literally look at everything as a potential slot machine. Now, when that person cannot see the future, so not only when they could see it, it was bleak, now they really can't. What do you want them to do? They've got money they want to invest. Do they just go spend that money? Do they save for retirement? Like, how should a young person now, when technology makes the future impossible to see, by my estimation, what do they do with their money? Just as one question.
I mean, the short answer is I don't know. I'm not an expert in investment, but I think I'm going to be a little bit of a beating a dead horse here, because, and I have worked with people who have both made a ton of money in crypto and who have lost a ton of money. I've had experiences with spouses who, their partner invested a ton of stuff, liquidated their 401k and all this kind of stuff, and really took big risks, lost it all, terrified, suicidal. So I've seen that all. And I think this is the weird thing, right? So I've worked with like a lot of different people, but this is why I believe what I believe, because at the end of the day, all these people are human, right? So whether you're trying to win an esports tournament, or you're trying to make money, or you're figuring out whether you have kids or not, at the end of the day, you are you. So I think for a lot of these people, in terms of planning for the future, the general idea is to think about what is your attachment towards this thing. So if I want to have a house, why do you want to have a house? What do you appreciate about a house? To really understand the nature of your wants and why you're chasing this. Because now let's think about this, right? Because as long as my North Star stays my North Star, then it becomes an increasingly impossible situation. And I certainly don't know enough about finance to say this is the right way to invest in today's world. I have no fucking idea. I don't know what to do with my money, right? And I have no idea. And so, and even knowledgeable people have no idea. So how do I approach this? I approach this by sort of telling people, okay, stop for a second, and before you lock in your assumptions about what you want. And there are even like subtle things that you're talking about, which are really problematic. Like, so you compare to boomers. Why do we compare to boomers? Why don't we compare to ancient Egyptians or the Visigoths? Why do we compare to this generation? So this is something we have to understand. This is a good example of what we don't understand about our mind. See, anytime our ego or our ahamkara becomes active, it makes comparisons. But the comparisons it makes are very selective. And the comparisons that it makes reinforce the emotions that we're feeling. So why do we compare to the boomers? Because we all feel like things are unfair. And we think, I know this sounds kind of weird, a lot of people disagree with this, but there's science behind it. See, we think that the reason that our lot is unfair is because the boomers had it better. But the unfairness comes first, and then our mind finds a reason, a logic, some kind of data to support the way that we feel in the moment. And I'll give you a simple example. If everyone's like, that's crazy, no, the boomers had it better. But yeah, but why do you compare to the boomers compared to whatever other generation? Other simple thing is, if you feel insecure about your appearance, your brain will reduce the inputs that are reassuring and will amplify negative inputs when it comes to your appearance. You'll ignore, and you'll know this, I'm sure, because you have very successful people, and a lot of people do this. You may have done this yourself, where you downplay your successes and you focus on your faults. Because if you do that, that's how you improve, right? Because if we rest on our laurels, we won't keep climbing. So this same fundamental ego is at play here when we look at the world. Things used to be so unfair. If you're making that comparison, so stop making that comparison. I know it's kind of weird. But then what ends up happening is, as you stop making comparisons to the boomers, because what is the good of that? Like, it's not actionable in any way. All it does is just make you feel bad, and it pisses you off. And the internet, by the way, is creating an algorithm of righteous fury against the boomers. Right? Because why are we so anti-boomer? Why does the internet serve us so much content? Because that's what gets millennials and Gen Z clicking more. And so we're all being sucked into this crap, whether we realize it or not. So I'm going to sort of dodge the premise of the question. Don't ask me about that. The answer is stop being egotistical about it. Stop worrying about what happened in the past, because what good does it do you? This is the hand of cards that you've been dealt. And I imagine you'll agree with me here that the focus is not, we can cry as much as we want to about the shitty hand that we're dealt, but the question is how you're going to play it. Mm-hmm. And the big lesson that I learned in my life is there are a lot of shitty hands which you can win with. And a great example of this is failing out of college. In what world is failing out of college an advantage? In the one world that you wind up at Harvard Medical School, and if I had a 4.0, I would have been no different from the 6,000 other people that were there. Right? So this is what's really crazy, is when you remove all those filters that we're talking about, you realize that the world is not nearly as bleak as we think it is. We're literally being conditioned. How many posts have you seen or people in your audience seen about boomers do this, boomers do that, boomers do this, boomers do that? And it's conditioning your mind, and you're not able to see reality as it is. It's suffering. We don't know how to act. Why don't we know how to act? Because we're not acting in the real world. We're acting in a conditioned world. Our frame of reference has been shaped, and then we feel paralyzed. And you're asking me what is the right way to succeed in this frame of reference. I don't accept the premise of the question. The problem is that the frame of reference is wrong. So that's what you need to get out of. And when I have patients who deal with tons of uncertainty, that's what I do. And it's amazing what we see. People in finance and this and that, people who worked at Lehman Brothers and it got destroyed and then went somewhere else, and then other things have imploded and stuff like that. What is Silicon Valley Bank or whatever. Like, I've had people who have been at multiple of these failed things, and they're like, how do I live my life? It seems like I'm getting screwed every single way. You can't control any of that. And it's amazing. So when you work with these people, you get rid of that frame of reference, you find peace, the path becomes clear. Because even if you look at people who say, like, this doesn't work, right? So let's talk about finances. And someone says, okay, you should do this. But then if you really pay attention, why can't they do that? Because their mind jumps in and says, that won't work. It won't be enough. It won't be enough. It won't be enough. So what paralyzes all these people from acting? It's your own mind. If you are confused and uncertain about life, if you really look at where that confusion comes from, it's because your mind paralyzes you. You think, maybe I should do this. The mind says it isn't good enough. It isn't good enough. It isn't good enough. And then we enter this false belief that if I get enough information from the outside, then the decision in the mind will become easy, which makes sense, right? If I can time travel and see the future, then I know what to invest in. You're absolutely right. But that's not the right way to do it. The consistent way that the Buddha figured out, and people, Adi Yogi or Shiva, thousands of years even before the Buddha figured out, which works for bankers and CEOs and whatever, homeless people, is this strategy. Clean your mind. Step away. Pay attention to why your ego is active. How does it feel to have boomers have such an easy life? And buddy, you just scratch the surface. You get born in 1950, you go to college in the 60s, you do a bunch of fucking LSD, you slide into a job with very little competition. You invest in whatever the fuck. It grows, you buy a house in the 70s when things are super cheap, and then you retire with a gigantic pile of money in the early 2000s before the 2007, 2008 crash. You didn't have to work hard in college. You got to do a bunch of drugs before things got criminalized. You had fun. You slipped into tons of money. Buying a house was easy. And then you got to retire. And then the icing on the cake is then you get to shit on the next generation for them not working as hard as you did. They are lucky. So what? Step away from all that stuff. Look at your life as it is. Look at what really paralyzes you. And what you'll find is it's your mind, not something outside of you. And once you do that, things become easy. I don't know if that makes sense.
That was great. I didn't want to say a word. Okay, we could have done drugs in the 60s if we were lucky enough, but let's say that we do some LSD or other things now. Is there a real third eye that opens? How much of that is real?
I think it's 100% real. But I think biological reductionists will have difficulty with this, right? So let's understand. So just for some context. So we have this idea in the yogic system that we have these 7 chakras. So chakras there's this energy that's seated at the base of our spine called the Kundalini Shakti. And as it rises to the top of our spine, we will become enlightened. As it travels through the chakras, it awakens believably psychic powers. So what a lot of people don't realize is everyone thinks I'm a good psychiatrist because I talk to someone and I see into their soul or whatever. And the thing is, I'm cheating. So I've done third eye practice for about 20 years now. So like I have an intuition about things that many other people don't. So everyone thinks I'm special. I'm not special. It's kind of like, if you train in free diving, you can hold your breath for a very long time. It's not like you're some magical creature. It's just you've trained in a particular way. Now, there has to be, and this is kind of a lot of what my research used to be. This was back when I was faculty at Harvard, but developing clinical protocols based on these yogic theories. And what I sort of found is that we had good clinical outcomes. Not all mindfulness is the same. And I think what's going on when you do third eye practices, it's probably from a biological perspective, somehow strengthening your empathic circuits so you're able to detect information. I don't think it's anything magical. Right. So there's absolutely a
If you're not doing drugs, what is the practice? Is it meditative in nature?
Yeah, it's meditative. So there's all kinds of different practices. So we have a practice that we call charging the laser beam, which
That's a good name.
Yeah, my community came up with it. So if you kind of hold your middle finger over your eyebrow center, and you close your eyes, you'll detect like some sensation there. And you hold it there for about 60 seconds, and then you can put your hand down, and then you just focus on that sensation. It's a very simple introductory practice to open the third eye. So it'll take years to open, but you kind of do that for a while. It's just a cool thing to focus on. Mm. So I suspect that these esoteric meditation practices undoubtedly have some kind of neuroscientific effect. Now, I can't say with certainty that there is something magical about them, but there's definitely something neuroscientific. But I think the third eye is absolutely real. And I think there's a really simple...
What is the third eye giving you access to? Is it simply you're stepping outside of mind, and that's what we call that?
That's one way to step outside of mind. So we're so basic that it's kind of like, okay, we're going to... there's leaving the Earth, but there's 1,000 directions to go. There are solar systems, there are galaxies, all this kind of stuff. So transcending mind is just step number 1. There's a whole universe to explore. So when we...
Do you mean that literally?
Yes.
As in, I don't know if this is the right word, astral projection?
Yes, but I don't like that term because I think it has all kinds of connotations to it.
Okay.
So I'll kind of explain it quickly, and this may not convince anyone, but if you want to know what I think, I'm just going to share.
I'm here to understand.
So the first thing to understand is that, does a thought exist? Like, what do you think?
Yes.
What is a thought? So this is qualia that you were talking about earlier,
yeah,
right?
Thought is a sequence of neurons firing in a given pattern.
So that is the biological correlate of a thought, right? So do we have any scientific evidence of the existence of thought?
Given the way you're defining it, I don't know, but I would say it the opposite way, that the thought is what arises when neurons fire in that order. Like they are not separate things.
Okay, so fine, they can be connected. So I would say that we have no scientific evidence, and I've talked to neuroscientists and psychiatrists, and no one has convinced me otherwise yet. And in fact, the majority of people I've talked to agree with this, that we have no scientific evidence of the existence of thought.
Why not? Why are you discounting the firing of neurons as...
What is the firing of a neuron?
What is it? What do you mean?
What is it? What do we have evidence of?
At an electrochemical level?
Yeah, that's what it is, right? So we have sodium channels that open up, that depolarizes the neuron, creates an action potential. So what is reality? The reality is there are sodium channels moving through a neuron.
Yes.
A transporter. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. That's not a thought. How do we know that neurons are where we think from?
That feels like you're asking me, how do we know that walking exists because all we can do is see the way that the muscle fiber is firing?
Absolutely.
You know walking exists because you can watch somebody walk across the fucking room.
Then you have sensory perception, right? So we have we have photons that are bouncing off of their body that are entering our eyes.
Yeah.
That's how we observe. So this is what's weird, right? So we take this for granted that we kind of miss it. Is how do we know that the amygdala is where emotions happen? It's because we do an fMRI study, which measures blood flow to the brain. So what we literally have proof of is there's blood flowing to a tissue in the brain. That's all we have proof of. How do we know that's where emotions happen? Because we ask someone, what are you feeling when tissue goes here? They say, I'm feeling fear. So there is a subjective realm of existence, which is not biological. So when you have a thought, it correlates with neurons, but the substance of a thought is not, there may be electrical impulses 100% of the time, but that is an electrical impulse. That's not a thought. Our subjective experience of a thought is a different thing. It's not material. It's not electrons. Does that make sense?
Okay, so let me steel man your argument, and then I'll know at least if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly. Okay, so Tom, you have to understand that there is a difference between the firing of the neurons and the ineffable thing that we call a thought. Now, this ineffable thing cannot be measured, cannot be detected with current scientific tools. But I grant you that, yes, there is a firing that we see that is correlated with the thought, but they are not one and the same. And therefore, you have to understand that the thought, which is ineffable, is existing outside of the physical structures of the brain.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, because it doesn't have space, right? So it doesn't have material location.
The thought.
The thought.
That doesn't feel accurate to me. Okay, let me really try to. Does this feel like a sky cloud differential to you? Does that analogy still make all the sense with this?
All I'm saying is that you have a subjective experience of thoughts, which is different from the physicality of sodium channels sodium ions moving through a sodium transporter and creating an electrical gradient.
Yep.
Those are two different things. The subjective experience of a thought, they may be 100% correlated. And I'm not saying that the subjective experience is not a hallucination that arises.
Does it change anything for you if I say they're causative, not just correlated?
Even if they're causative, that's fine, but they're still qualitatively different things.
Yep.
Agree or disagree?
Yeah, agreed,
Okay.
very much.
So now the question is, this is what we have to understand. So science is only able to explore the physical. It can't explore this realm of existence that is non-physical, right? So science can absorb, that we can observe, that's literally what we do. This is how we figured out the amygdala is where we feel fear. Because we looked at this physical structure in the brain that correlates with these thoughts. We looked at our frontal lobes, which correlates with willpower. We looked at our nucleus accumbens, which correlates with motivation and desire. So we have a subjective experience of being a human, which can be 100% correlated with the brain. And if you want to say it can be 100% causative of the brain, that's fine. It's okay, right?
But that feels like it makes, if it is causative, if thoughts are causative from the brain, it seems impossible for you to explore the universe, no matter how widely your third eye opens, because your brain and your...
Oh, no, not the physical universe.
Okay. So are you saying that there resides a universe in the same liminal space that thoughts exist?
Exactly.
Wow. No one has ever gotten me to that before. Okay.
Right? Because in science, what we do is we don't explore thought, we explore tissue.
Yes.
We explore neurons, we explore electrical signals. We do not literally use the qualia of thought to explore in the direction away from the physical.
Can we bring it back? Because I don't know that I'm tracking that, but I really am excited because you've gotten me to see an element of this argument I've never understood before. Okay, so in the liminal space where the thought exists, but is a separate thing from the firing, even if only in a qualitative way, is a separate thing from the firing of the neurons. If I do DMT and I feel I have encountered real alien beings, which for anybody that hasn't heard that before is a claim a lot of people that do DMT make.
There's a study that showed that 94% of people who experience DMT, 94% of people who experience DMT users will encounter otherworldly beings.
Okay. Now, I haven't done DMT, but I've always had what seems to me there, when you dream, you see somebody who's not your mom, but you're like, that's my mom. So there's a difference between the thing I see and then just, I know it is my mom. And so I've always thought that DMT is going to be like that. You see just a vision, but your brain is really telling you, that's an alien, man. So is what you're saying that in the liminal space where thoughts exist, that there are actual beings that exist in that liminal space that you actually encounter?
Yes.
Does that liminal space exist in time and space?
I don't know if it exists. I think so. But I don't think so it's not physical. So this is the key thing to understand, right? So you have the subjective experience of a thought, which can be correlated or causated. There's some link between the physical world. I'm not saying there isn't. But my point is that if we look at the direction of exploration, of what we call science is in the physical realm. So we took something like a brain and then we opened up the skull and then we measured it. We sent X-rays through it. We looked at the fluctuations of proton molecules. We looked at things like the electrical activity based on electrodes on the scalp. This is literally what exists, right?
Yes.
So electrical activity across the brain is not the same as the subjective experience
Would
of a
you
thought.
love or hate me calling this liminal space imagination?
Imagination is the first layer of it.
Okay. So are you saying
imagination, thoughts, and feelings are what 99% of human beings have access to, in the same way that 99% of human beings have access to Earth, but very few of us have gone into the stars. So our basic sense of perception, with the naked eye, we can see what 99% of human beings can see, but using certain technology like a telescope, we can observe things that are scientifically impossible for 99% of people to observe. And if you want to understand what the third eye is, it is technology for the liminal space. So as we do meditation techniques, we are utilizing tools that let us explore the completely non-physical realm. Because we as human beings are seated between both sides of this. We have the subjective experience realm, which is qualitatively different from the biological realm. The problem is that the more we've advanced in science, the less we've explored that realm. In fact, people who are so well-versed like you have never even considered that that is an entire realm to be explored.
How is the non-physical world different than dreams?
Dreams are one version of the non-physical world. But dreams are just the same as reality.
Version or interaction with the only non-physical world?
I don't understand that question. But dream is no different from our general perception.
So you're saying it's not the same?
No. So what I'm talking. So a dream is just a different perceptual reality.
Yes.
Or an imagination.
And you're saying the non-physical world is not that. It is a far more profound.
No. Okay. So this is going to sound kind of weird, but if regular existence is here, like the thoughts and emotions that I experience in my waking state, I feel the emotions that I experience in my dream, right? That's no different. The fear that you experience in the dream is 100% the same as the fear that you experience in real life.
Yep.
And there are meditative practices where you can be consciously aware in dreams. So this is something that you can explore. But they're still at this level. What I'm talking about is this direction. So at the end of the day, a dream is still a perceptual, emotional, and thinking experience. It's not actually moving out. It's just like regular life, except it's false, right? Imagination is the same way as well. It's just thought, but it's not actual exploration in those dimensions.
Okay. Is the non-physical, how does the non-physical world differ from magic?
What do you mean by magic? I don't know what you mean by that term.
I was trying to see if you would have an allergic reaction to that more than I think it's a literal question. I cannot conceive yet of what you mean. And so, like a Zen koan, I'm trying to knock myself out of my
Well, of course you can't conceive of what I
my
mean.
frame of reference so that I can see what you're talking about. I need a model of conception.
Okay, I'll put it this way. A model of conception, this could be the worst thing that I've ever come up with, or it could be the best thing that I've ever come
I
up with.
already love it.
So before you hit puberty, people can talk about erections and sex,
Mhm.
right? So I had one friend of mine who was a couple years older, a friend of my brother's. And so he was explaining to me what sex was like, right? And so I was
Terrible,
like,
I'm
I was like
sure.
8 or 9, and he was like, it's when you put your thing in the girl's hole. Now, I had never seen a naked girl before. I didn't
Right.
realize that they have more than one hole. So I thought sex was basically like, doing it in the butt all the time. I was like, that's
Not going to
weird.
get far with that.
So if you sort of think about my capacity to understand
Yep.
the concept of orgasm, if I am pre-puberty, is 0. It'll seem completely imagination, mythical. I can try to approximate it with imagination, but I have no idea what an orgasm is like. Even my friend tells me it's like the best candy you've ever had or the best video game you've ever had. Comes nowhere close to orgasm. The whole phenomenon of sexuality, attraction, lust, intercourse, and orgasm is completely, it's like trying to explain philosophy to a dog. Agreed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going to give you one that will resonate certainly with me better, maybe other people, because you degraded my mind in that analogy, not just my experience. So I will say it's like love before you've been in love.
Absolutely.
So that is admittedly hard to imagine, but I can at least anchor myself around how it arises through a physicalist model.
Fine. So that's okay. So
I
here's
won't
what
have the qualia, but I'll have the process.
So here's the reason I use the puberty example. Because what
Yes.
happens is in puberty, you have a fundamental change of your biology, of your hormones, of your tissues, of your brain that allows you to have an experience that you could literally would be impossible for you to have before. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So in meditation, the process of doing esoteric sadhana is spiritual practice. When you do this, you go through something like puberty, but in the non-material plane. In the spiritual realm, you go through a transformation that allows you to experience things that were literally unfathomable before. And if you try to explain it to anyone who has not gone through that transformation, because it is almost, like puberty is the best example I can think of, because it changes the way that you literally function.
Mm.
And it opens you up to levels of experience that cannot be described, which is precisely why the yogis don't describe it. Which is why these texts were considered esoteric, because the way that these were originally taught is they weren't talked about. You actually put people through puberty first, and then you start teaching.
Oh, that was fun. That was fun. Where can people follow you for more amazing conversations?
I guess check out our YouTube channel, so Healthy Gamer GG. You'll find this kind of stuff, I suppose, everything we talked about, gender dynamics, neuroscience, psychiatry, and then sometimes some of the weird spiritual stuff.
I love it the most. Boys and girls, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you want to scale your business and avoid all the BS advice out there, check out my latest episode with Alex Hormozi.
You can drink and do drugs and watch porn. If you still do the that's all that matters. I want to do the formula and then live my life how I want to live.
Each of us gets to make a daily choice to play the victim or play the game.